Warning. This episode contains details that some listeners may find disturbing. Welcome to A Study of Strange. I'm Michael May, and I can't believe I have now been around long enough that I'm doing my first ever re-release of one of my first episodes. Thank you to everybody who's been with me from the early days, and thank you to all the new listeners that I've been gaining. I would be doing the show just for myself, for fun, so I really appreciate that people tune in and the show has continued to grow. If you are new, please take a moment to follow, subscribe, review, check out our website, subscribe to our Substack to support the show. You know the routine. Now, this re-release, this episode, is about the murder mystery of Dr. William Dean, a tale with murder, spies, conspiracies. It is one of my favorite episodes that I've ever done. I've cleaned up the audio a bit and combined the two episodes that I did on this into one very long episode. So if you're new to the show and you didn't hear this before, I think it's a treat. And if you've been with me for a while, it is definitely worth a revisit because it is such a fascinating mystery. Now, enough of my preamble rambling. Enjoy the show. April 1917, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. An unrecognized plane was spotted circling the Portsmouth Naval Yard, which was building submarines for use in the First World War. Rumors of German spies were fresh on everyone's mind, which is why soldiers shot at the unidentified plane, but it escaped. This is not the only strange sighting in southern New Hampshire during the war that allegedly had to do with German spies. For a while, people reported seeing flashing lights coming from mountaintops. These sometimes elicited more flashes from other mountaintops, seemingly a series of secret communications traversing the land in New Hampshire. But what do these rumors have to do with a murder in August of 1918? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Today, we explore the murder of Dr. William Dean. This is A Study of Strange. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Michael May, and today we're studying a very strange case of a murder of a Dr. William Dean in New Hampshire in 1918. And with me, Tara looks very excited, is husband and wife, Tara Perry and Jordan Wayne Long. They are filmmakers. Tara is also an actress and writer. Jordan is a director and artist, and it's so many other things I can't list. But they're both with me today to help. So it's my first time having three people, including myself, on a podcast. Welcome, guys.
We're delighted to be here, Michael May.
This, you guys.
Every time I laugh, so does the baby.
Oh, that's right.
Technically, there's four people.
There are four. Your daughter is part of the show. So they have a wee little one. So part of having two of you guys on is actually very helpful in case your daughter needs something. So they have a newborn with them today in case anybody hears some baby sounds that don't have anything to do with the show. So you guys, just real quick, we'll just plug a couple of things. Most recently, you guys worked together on Ghosts of the Ozarks that I was fortunate enough to work on too. So everybody check that out. And they can pretty much watch that almost everywhere, right? Yeah.
You can rent it on any platform, and it's also on Tubi with ads.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can see it anywhere.
Just Google Ghosts of the Ozarks. Also, Squirrel recently came out on Tubi, and it's also somewhere else too.
Yeah.
Tubi and Freevee. What is it on?
It's going to be on Freevee and Roku coming up. It's just going to expand slowly.
Got it.
But
So
right
it's on
now you can
Tubi.
see it on Tubi.
And Squirrel.
I'm so excited to have that film out.
I know. And Squirrel was actually, this will tie into why I wanted you guys on the show, because our story takes place in New Hampshire, in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, which is very close. Yeah.
We love Jaffrey.
We've been there.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
we've cosplayed there.
Ooh. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We'll have to do another episode about that.
We did some LARPing there. It's really
Ooh,
fun.
Neat. So Jordan's family, or I guess Tara's family too, since you guys are married, owns some property there called the Aldworth Manor in Harrisville, which is just down the road from Jaffrey, New Hampshire. It's where Squirrel was shot. Also, Jordan's done a ton of work up there. You guys vacation up there. Your family's there. I also was up there recently, which I'll get into in a second. But that's why I wanted you guys on this episode, because you can actually lend some insight into what the little towns are like and the communities and all of that good stuff. So I'm really excited about this.
Oh, so fun. Did you get to do
We are
some research
too.
when you were up there last? Is that what you went up there for? You were just getting
Yes.
all the answers. I know.
Yes, actually, let me, if you don't mind, because I actually think that should be part of the story. So I'll tell that how I came across this in just a second. Let me just do some housekeeping, some of the like podcast housekeeping stuff,
Of course.
which makes me
Please.
sound cool. So thank you everybody that's listened so far and subscribed. If you like this show, if you like these kind of topics, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And you can also learn more on astudyofstrange.com. And not while this recording is happening, but when the show comes out, I'm giving a giveaway out on Patreon for anybody that signs up on Patreon for like the next, it's like 60 days. You can read about it on there. If you sign up, you get a free video message from me. You guys will
Right.
probably want that
I'm
because you
in.
don't see me in real life. So
I'm down.
yeah,
These are great.
yeah. I'm actually very excited about that. So, and as of this recording, the show hasn't even been out a week yet. So thank you to everybody who's been listening. It's been really fun to get some feedback, and people seem to be enjoying themselves, or everybody's just being
You've
nice.
done a great job, man.
Oh, thank you so much.
We love listen to them.
So let me tell you why I wanted to do this episode about Dr. William Dean and his murder. I'll give you the story of how he came across it, because I didn't know this. This is actually not a super well-known story. I came across this story while I was at the Aldworth Manor in Harrisville, New Hampshire, because I was up there helping you guys with a documentary that you're producing. And I'm potentially writing, not potentially, myself and our friend Sean were writing a script that would actually take place at Aldworth Manor. So I was doing some research. And while I was there, I procrastinated a little bit one day. And I was like, I'm going to look up it, see if there's any kind of local lore, local legends, local mysteries of the general area in sort of southern New Hampshire for my podcast. And I came across an article that I mentioned in the intro, so you guys haven't heard it, but there's an article that has this, it's like a paragraph or two that talks about this plane that was unidentified flying over the Portsmouth Naval Yard in New Hampshire in 1917. And there was a lot of paranoia about German spies. So the local militia actually fired upon the plane, and it kind of escaped inland and flying back over land, and they never shot it.
Wow.
So that hooked me. And then they tied it into where there's spies, there's strange lights that happen that are like signal lights, and they tie it into this murder. And so I was like, okay, I'm hooked. I'm going to read more about this and see what I can find out. And it actually took me a while. There's not a ton, there's a lot of information out there, but because it's not super popular, it's kind of buried in the waves of the web when you search the web. And I start reading about it more, and I read about Dr. Dean, and the stories talk about these strange lights at the top of Mount Monadnock. I always say that wrong, so I have to say it slowly.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah. So there's lights from the top of Mount Monadnock. There's sort of signal lights. They do various things. And also the other mountains in the nearby area as well. There's these other signal lights. So it's almost as if people are communicating and no one knows who's doing it. And I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, wait, German spies in New Hampshire? Like, that just seems weird. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Jordan.
No, but as soon as you say that, it reminds me of Squirrel, because Matt wrote about like the Hessian soldiers that were there during the Revolutionary War, and there were like a lot of regiments there like fighting, and I'm like, that's just really interesting that all those years later there's still that connection. I wonder if it has anything to do with the people sticking around. Very interesting.
You know, it might be. I'll talk a little bit about that at a certain point in the pod about why this area may have been prominent with some like German sympathizers or German ancestry, like people that have family from Germany. But when I was like, wait, why New Hampshire? I looked into that. The Portsmouth Naval Yard, which was mentioned in that article, they were building submarines for the use for the U.S. Army in World War I. So it was actually a very strategic base. Not only that, but from the top of Mount Monadnock, you can see Boston on a clear day. And it's kind of a
Whoa.
perfect corridor from all the mountains in sort of upstate New York through Vermont, New Hampshire, into Maine. It's a perfect place to send messages from inland out to sea to German ships or submarines.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, imagine how far that's like a 2-hour drive now from
Boston.
To
Monadnock
be
to
able to signal
Boston.
that far.
To be able to signal in an instant. Like, oh my gosh. Also, another funny tidbit. Squirrel premiered at New Hampshire Film Festival in Portsmouth.
Ooh, nice tie-in.
It's all come around.
It's all come around.
We drank at a bar called
No,
The
that's
Wilder.
it makes all the, it's so interesting. Like even in the Revolutionary War, like I lived on the South Shore of Boston and it was in Marshfield, and they would like build the ships way inland in the marshes to hide.
Oh, interesting.
And then they would like create trenches to get the boats out.
Whoa.
Like, and to hide, their making from the British. So it's really interesting that they're still doing that in World War II.
I also want a quick note. You started that little tidbit with back in the Revolutionary War, and then cut to when I lived in Boston. So it sounded like you lived in Boston during the Revolutionary War.
I'm a great storyteller. It's pretty incredible.
So one of the things,
of year old,
yeah, you're looking great, Jordan. You look fantastic for your age. So your birthday that you just had this week,
70th.
Yeah, 270.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on making it that far, and you finally have a baby. Took you a while.
Thank you.
So
like
anyway,
Twilight.
while I'm reading about this story, I keep thinking to myself, these lights. They're an embellishment. It's some sort of local legends. I'm going to read about it and find out it's not really anything. This isn't going to be appropriate for the podcast because there won't be enough there. I was wrong. Like, these lights were a very serious matter, so serious that they were federal agents investigating in New Hampshire and around New England. That's what it's called, New England. So I was like, holy shit, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even gotten to the murder mystery yet. So it's very fascinating. And I'm so excited to share this story with somebody or some people.
Me too. And Monadnock, like what a, like that mountain, it's like the second most climbed mountain in the world or something.
Yeah.
Just because it's so easy access. It's just wild. And
yeah, when I was up there working on the documentary for you guys, and we were interviewing this farmer, he actually said it was the most climbed mountain in North America. I don't know. Sure, it's in the
North
top.
America, yeah.
I bet in North America,
it's Mount Fuji and then Mount Monadnock.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it's more of a hike. It's not, for those interested in climbing, just so you're aware, it's not, hanging off a cliffside. It is more of a nice hike. Maybe a hard hike.
Indeed.
But it's nice. So this story is, you could tell by the way I'm talking, my eyes went crossed researching this because there is so much information. There are I'm pretty sure thousands of pages of like governmental documents. I read through a grand jury inquest, like the whole transcript of the entire trial, old newspaper articles, all this kind of stuff. So my eyes went a little crazy. So hopefully I do a decent job. I will have to skip over a lot of information in these episodes, but it's just to actually make sure we don't do 20 episodes of it and just a couple. But what I want to ask listeners out there is, if you are intrigued by this story today, write in astudyofstrange@gmail.com and tell me. And what I'll do is I'll actually reach out to the Historical Society in Jaffrey that put together most of the information I used to research this. And I'll see if I can get an interview with somebody, something like that. Because the only bit of information or research I haven't done yet is actually talk to people on the ground there. This is still a very important story to the local residents of Jaffrey. And people have, you guys know the small towns of New Hampshire. Everybody's relatives and grandfather, they all knew each other. The same families are still in town. This is a really important story and they want it solved. And so I think they want people to know about it. So if there is intrigue in this episode, please write in, let me know, and I will do a follow-up of some kind, everybody. So
that's awesome.
All right, guys. Let's actually dive into it. That was too much information, but I thought it was interesting how I came across it. So I did want to share that.
That's really neat. And it's already prompted me, like, thinking about being on top of Mount Monadnock and thinking about the plane flying.
Yeah.
Like, you can often see planes lower than the mountain when you're like on top.
Oh, really?
Like, man, yeah. So like, man, it's just fascinating. Let's dig in.
Yeah. So you've been up there, huh?
Yeah, I've climbed it a couple times, and it's wild because there's so much forest all around Mount Monadnock, but you can see the towns, you can see like prominent buildings, you can even see Aldworth from up there.
Oh, cool.
But it really is when you see lots of Cessnas and stuff will fly, but they'll be lower because they're kind of like sightseeing and stuff. And it's really like Jaffrey is just down below, you know, from the bottom of the mountain. And then it's really just kind of like small New England towns surrounded by forest. So that's kind of like the vibe of that area.
Yeah, and it was fun when when I first read about this. What was so surreal is I was staring at Mount Monadnock out the window, and I was like, "Wait, that mountain had lights? That was weird signal lights during World War I. Holy shit!" Like it was a bit surreal. It was really cool.
You'd be able to see that from everywhere.
Yeah, everyone would see it. No wonder there's so many documentations of it, because you can see it from everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, that was the whole point, I would imagine, is they needed a place that people could actually see. So, all right, let's dive in. And I'll start with William Dean, who is the sad victim of this case. So a little background on him. He was born on February 12th, 1855 in Delaware. Some accounts you'll come across say he was born in Siam, which is modern-day Thailand. But he was actually born in Delaware, and his family, when he was 5, moved to Siam because his father was a reverend and like a missionary to China and Asia. And he actually became friends with the Prince of Siam when he was young and living in Siam, which is pretty cool. He moved back to the States when he was young, and he started being educated by his uncle. Ooh, that's a baby, everybody. It kind of sounded like a cat.
It sounded like a dinosaur.
So he moved back to the States as a kid. He started being educated by his uncle, Dr. Henry Dean of New York. And Dr. Dean became a medical student and was studying in New York at the Rochester Hospital. An interesting fact of his life is he was actually put in charge of the hospital while he was still a medical student. So he was quite a brilliant young man.
Wow.
However, he did not actually go into medicine. He never formally practiced it because he suffered from tuberculosis, which would come and go. And his advice from doctors was to move to the country. And that's actually why he moved from New York to New Hampshire, to Jaffrey, New Hampshire. And he married his first cousin, Mary Dean, more common back then in the 1800s.
Classic.
Yep. He was 25. She was older than him by, I think, 2 or 3 years. And they lived off of her wealth primarily, because I'm pretty sure it was her dad who was the father that
his
educated
uncle.
Dr. Dean. Yeah. Thank you.
A lot of medical debt to wipe away there, I bet.
Yes. So in 1889, he bought what is the former Elijah Smith farm in Jaffrey. Ooh. And Jaffrey, in the early 1900s, it's about 2,000 residents. Today, it's only like 4,000. It's still a small town. And on the property, they built a bungalow, which that's what they would call it, a bungalow. It's just a nice house. And then they also built, years later, what they called the Big House, which is a much nicer house on top of a hill that kind of overlooked things and had a nice view of Mount Monadnock. And in this is like the 1890s. By a decade or so later, they actually moved out of the big house, lived in the bungalow, and they would rent the big house out in the summertime. And I don't think this has changed much for like places like Vermont and New Hampshire, but people from Boston, New York, the bigger cities in New England would vacation in places like New Hampshire. And back then they would stay the whole summer. So it wasn't like, oh, you get a hotel room for a week or whatever. They would rent a house, be there all summer long to enjoy the beautiful sights of lovely New England. Now, Dean was known around town as being a bit peculiar. He was a very nice guy, very well respected in town, but he would wear like bright bow ties. His style was different.
That just sounds cool.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. He's a cool guy.
That's not weird. That's just cool.
Yeah, and it's a cool rural farming town, so that's going to stand out. But it doesn't mean anybody was, had
they're not used to personality.
Right. And he also did something very strange for a rural.
I'm right there with you.
There you go.
Don't ask me.
No, what is it? I forget what show that was. The juror. That's got to be Third Rock from the 30 Rock. Excuse me.
30 Rock.
There we go. So anyway, he would milk his cows at noon and midnight, which you don't do when you're a farmer. It was just an odd way of living. He would stay up late. He would sleep in the morning because he's basically living off family wealth and occasionally renting out a home. So he doesn't have to abide by normal schedules. Now, in 1916, a man named Lawrence Colfelt Jr. and his wife, Margaret, and their stepdaughter, or his stepdaughter, Margaret's actual daughter, they moved to the Jaffrey area. They originally stayed at a different place, and in around 1917, they moved into the dean's big house. And how much do I want to share right now about Colfelt? We will come back to him, especially in part 2. Yeah, it is important. So Colfelt was similarly kind of peculiar in that he didn't have a job. He inherited money from his wealthy grandfather, and people thought he was very strange because of that. Like, that just wasn't like a trust fund baby. Today we would be like, oh, a trust fund baby. But back then it was kind of poo-pooed upon. And also, war is a coming by the time he moves to Jaffrey. And so people, when you weren't doing anything to help the community or contributing to society, people really frowned upon that. So yeah, he was considered very unusual. His family also stayed in town over the winter, which, if you're not local, you do not stay in New Hampshire over the winter. That is, it's not fun. So why is someone doing that? He doesn't have a job, so why is he there? It was just a very unusual thing to do. Now, accounts say that in May of 1918, Dr. Dean kicked Colfelt out of the big house. And most of what I read says he gave him 24 hours to vacate. I actually have contradictions to that he was not given 24 hours, but he was indeed kicked out. And so I'll just leave it at that is something to remember. We will talk about Colfelt much more later on in the show.
I like it.
Yeah. Now, at the time of William Dean's murder, Dean and his wife were not so much wealthy anymore. They had no steady income for decades now, and it was wartime. And they didn't have a steady income. So that's another reason why it's kind of odd that Dr. Dean kicked out his only source of income, which was his renter, the Colfelts. Also, Mrs. Dean wasn't in her, I don't know how to properly say this, but like her usual capacities anymore at the time of the death. She was suffering from dementia, some kind of dementia. They didn't quite nail it down specifically back in 1918. Yes, go ahead, Jordan.
No, this is just you're going to want to edit this out. You know what I'm going to say. I'm just giving a warning that they say that like when older ladies get UTIs, it can exhibit itself as dementia like often. And so like, I know that sounds weird, but
if you ever have any
like
older women in your family who people are like, she just kind of lost her mind one day and it's out of character, or like dementia doesn't run in the family or anything like that, get them tested for a UTI because they can't feel the symptoms quite like they used to. And it literally just messes with their brain.
I mean, hey, that's interesting. And look, the medicine wasn't where it is today in 1918.
Yeah.
It's over 100 years ago
now,
so.
would bring them back to normal.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she may
she
may have just had a urinary tract infection, bless her heart, Mrs. Dean.
We don't know, but the fact that she wasn't mentally there is a really important aspect of the case, and something that it's a detail that we have to know when we think about what is about to come. Now, let me get your opinion, guys, at knowing the area, knowing the small towns of New Hampshire. What would a brutal murder do to a town? Like, what do you think people would react like? What do you think people are going to think? Yeah,
it'd be everything that was talked about for years.
Yeah. I mean, it's like small town. Of course, it would be, especially if it's still unsolved, it would still be talked about. I mean, clearly, and it still is.
And like if everyone was seeing the lights on, and it's connected. I mean, like, can you imagine how just like terrifying the rumors would be?
You're hitting it on the head. I think you mentioned rumors, which I will talk about a lot today.
Like how do you trust your neighbor after that?
Yeah,
paranoia. What I mean? 'Cause it could be anyone.
Mm-hmm. And still talking about it. They're still talking about the whole Jaffrey Historical Society. Again, they're the ones that compiled all this information and all the transcripts and all this amazing thing, because they still want it solved. That's my feeling of it. I haven't heard it said that specifically, but I would imagine they're doing this because they want people.
That's going to be a great episode. You've got to You got to talk to them.
I know. Yeah. So please, everybody write in. studyofstrange@gmail.com. Let me know if you want me to follow up with
culprit's still
that.
out there. We have to find
Culprit's
him.
still out there. It's only been 104 years. He might still be alive.
Yeah.
Or she. Who knows? Okay, so before we get into the day of the murder, there are two quick bits of gossip that I do want to notate. Dr. Dean had told a few people that he had received a threatening letter. We don't know what was in the letter. We don't know who it was from. We don't know what it said. We don't know what the threat was. Dr. Dean, as far as we know, is the only person to ever have read it. No one has ever found it. Also, he apparently approached a local police officer named Lindsay and asked how he could get police protection if he needed it. So those are just two quick bits of details that are interesting. Now,
he knew something was up.
He knew something was up. Now, on the day of the murder, it was August 13th, 1918, and it was around noon, and a Mrs. Morrison, also, side note, you've probably already noticed this. I keep referring to people as like Mr., Dr., Mrs. That's because almost all the old newspaper articles, the court transcripts, even people today that have written stuff, there's this formal way of referring to people back then that just kind of has trickled down through the research. So that's the way I think about them now.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So anyway, Mrs. Morrison came by the Dean's property, and she was with two other women, Mrs. Harrington and Mrs. Lynch, and they were asking for donations for a type of like rubbish sale to raise money for a local hospital. And it's 1918. The war is not over yet at this point, so their local hospital is very, very important in wartime, obviously, as well as any time. So according to Mrs. Morrison's testimony, she said Mr. Dean said that he would love to write her a check, but he couldn't afford to. So he basically offered anything in the house. He was like, yeah, fine stuff. So they picked out some items in the house for the sale. And then Dean suggested that they go over to the big house, which was now empty because Colfelt had moved out about a month or so before. So Dr. Dean and Mrs. Morrison walked over to the big house together. The other lady stayed behind with Mrs. Dean. And this is where we get to our first scene, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, yeah.
So if you guys can open up the email I sent you with, it'll be Dean 1 is what I've called it.
Dean 1.
Let me know when you have it.
Oh, I've got it pulled up.
Sweet. Should we just
glasses on?
Oh, there you go. There you go. I love it. You have glasses on, a baby in your lap. This is good.
Look at me. I'm just relaxing in here with my sparkly water. Okay.
So do you guys want to keep sort of gender norms for casting, or do you want to mix it up? What do you guys want to do?
We don't care.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can. Do you want me to read for Mrs. Morrison?
Yeah, sure. So Tara, you'll be Mrs. Morrison. I'll read the descriptors, the scenes, settings, and things.
Thick Boston accent, right? Real thick. That's what you want.
Stop it.
I mean, back then, I have no idea what they would have sounded like back then, to be honest. Because it could have been more of that, like, oh yeah, down the road there. Like it could have been that kind of.
I can give you no idea.
Yeah, you don't.
I can give you that accent.
You guys are under no obligation to do an accent. It is up to you. See what happens. All right, you guys ready?
Yes.
Let's see what comes out.
All right, here we go. So it's the exterior of the Dean property during the day. Dr. Dean walks alongside Mrs. Morrison up a path towards the big house. About halfway up, Dean stops.
Mrs. Ware told me you've seen the lights in this part of the country. Wait, no, that's southern. I gotta.
Well, you're from Arkansas. It's all right.
Oh boy, he's good. All right, Dean. Miss Ware told me you've seen the lights in this part of the country. Have you seen them lately?
Yes, Mr. Dean. I saw them last night.
About what time?
I would say a little after 12.
Can you show me where?
So Mrs. Morrison leads Dr. Dean to a point in the yard and points up at Mount Monadnock. Dr. Dean puts a few stones and places them at their feet to mark the spot to see the location of the lights.
Miss Morrison, are you ever in communication with anyone who could be of any help with the lights?
Yes, I am in constant communication with the Boston office.
Well, when will you be in Boston next?
Tomorrow.
Could you do me a favor? Can you get a message to send up one of the best men they have? I want the very best, not just an ordinary man who doesn't know his work.
Couldn't you tell me what it is and I will get the message to them? I'll telephone as soon as I'm home.
No telephones. Miss Morrison, what I know is too dangerous for a woman. I have no right to tell you.
Why haven't you said anything before?
Because I wasn't ready. I wanted to be perfectly sure. Now, the quicker someone comes, the better. That went somewhere.
Yeah, it did. So that is, these are actually quotes from Mrs. Morrison's grand jury testimony about the conversation she had with Dean. So
Oh my God.
you have the instance of the lights that have been seen from the mountains. She has seen them. I will get to more her a bit later. She actually was working with federal agents about the lights. And he wanted someone to come investigate right away. And this is soon after he got a
but
threatening
not a
letter.
woman.
Well,
Yeah,
he couldn't. No,
not
women. It's too
It's much
dangerous
too
for a woman.
dangerous.
Yeah. So that is the day.
And look who died.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. So it's a really interesting scene and scenario that happened between the two of them. Now, where am I in my notes? There I am. I found it. So again, it's August 13th, 1918, the day of the murder. Mrs. Morrison leaves the property, and the rest of the day for Dr. Dean went something like this. He continued afternoon chores until the evening, and it's commonly known that he went into the town center of Jaffrey around 8:30 p.m. There was a witness, Alice Burgoyne, I hope I'm saying that right, who saw Dean in town around earlier than that at 6:45 or 7, where there was like a town band playing a performance, and she saw him there. Whether he was in town earlier than 8:30 or not, I don't know if it matters to the investigation, but I want to share it just in case someone else out there figures something out that I haven't. Regardless, he is in town at 8:30 to do shopping for the week. He drove his cart with a horse, just one horse. Most people did not own cars in that time in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. If they did, they still had a horse and buggy because in the winter they wouldn't use cars. They would use the horses in the winter. Stores in town stayed open until 9 p.m. on Tuesday because Jaffrey is popping on a Tuesday night.
That's later than they stay
late.
open now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So he buys some goods from a few stores, loads item into his carriage. And I'll mention at the grocery store, Goodnows or Goodnose, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sure locals to Jaffrey will get mad at me for not knowing. Let me know. Right in. His entire bill for a week's worth of food was $3.75. So, I love that.
Wow.
That's great.
He then went to the Dunkin's drugstore. It was around 8:45. And I should say there are a lot of witnesses because people are in town. So like this isn't just like, some hearsay about what he was doing. Like there's a lot of witnesses for his shopping.
New England runs on Dunkin'.
There you go. Nice plug. Dunkin' Donuts, please sponsor the show. So in the drugstore, he runs into Mr. Charles Rich's sister-in-law, Georgiana Hodgkins. Mr. Rich, we're also going to talk a lot about today. He's a good friend of Dr. Dean's. He worked at the local bank as a cashier, and he was also a magistrate for the court. In a lot of the articles from back then and today, he's referred to as Judge Rich. He was not a judge. He had like a ceremonial title in the court, but a respected man around town. And Georgiana Hodgkins, who's in the drugstore with Dr. Dean, it's his sister-in-law, and she was staying in town for like the summer or something like that. Dr. Dean and Georgiana started talking. People saw them talking and, hanging out a little. They knew each other very well. And Dr. Dean offered to give her a ride back to Mr. Rich's house that evening where she was staying. They left apparently a few minutes before 9 p.m. or a few minutes after, depending on which witness you talk to, but around 9. And Dean was in town. This may not matter either, but I find it interesting. He was in town asking for batteries. So like every store he went to, he wanted to find batteries for his flashlight because getting home on the horse and buggy, there's no headlights on those things. There's no street lights outside.
I'm just amazed that they had batteries in 1918. Yeah. Why didn't I think they had batteries that you could buy at the store?
Well, apparently not because he couldn't find any. So he was asking around for them. So it was just harder to get.
He's a time traveler. Everyone's like, what the hell is he talking about? Batteries. He couldn't just have a flame with like a silver bowl behind it that,
I mean, a lot of
he really got himself into trouble.
Like the Egyptians?
I can see the story already. He tries
to like. He was asking for it.
No. What I'm saying though, I can see where this guy's going. He's like, I'm gonna get these lights. I'm gonna talk to these guys. We'll figure out what's going on. Get abducted, and it just goes south from there.
Yeah. No. He wanted the lights to communicate potentially. Who knows? According to Miss Hodgkins, who he gave the ride to, and the cashier at the drugstore, Dean drove Hodgkins back to Mr. Rich's house. They arrive just a minute or so later, as it wasn't far away, and Mr. Rich was apparently in his kitchen heating water to treat a wound to his eye. So the common story here is that he told people that his horse had kicked him. And it's often confused. People think the horse kicked him in the eye. That's actually not the case. It kicked him like somewhere in the chest or stomach, and he was carrying a basket and he had a pipe in his mouth, and like he flung up and like the basket hit the pipe hits his eye, gives him a wound of some kind.
A horse kicks you in the eye, you're not heating up water in the kitchen.
No, you're either dead or you're getting a doctor. So yes,
my dad got kicked in the teeth one time and lost his upper lip, but they put it back on.
I don't know how to reply to that. That's what's so funny. Good for him. Good for Roger. Good on him.
I'm really glad they put it back too.
Yeah, I think that's important.
But man, that would hurt. Regardless, that would hurt.
Yeah,
right to
definitely.
the chest.
Okay, I have a question. I have a question. Who gave him a ride back?
Oh no, Dr. Dean gave Miss Georgiana Hodgkins a ride to Mr. Rich's house, and Mr. Rich is the one with the eye. Yep.
So it was
please ask those questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask why he was boiling water? How was that going to help his eyeball?
I don't know.
It's
and
1918.
Actually, it's 1918.
He got kicked in the chest. He was confused.
He might have been. Actually, he does have an anecdote or a story that he told people is that Dr. Dean was on like the patio or porch with Georgiana and Mrs. Rich. And he went out and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm not talking so much because I'm trying to treat this wound." And Dr. Dean had studied medicine, obviously. And he told him alcohol would do better than water, both on the outside and inside as well. It's made a little joke that he should.
Maybe he was just sterilizing. Maybe he was heating water up to sterilize something. And he's like, you know what? Alcohol's better.
So the Riches claim that Dr. Dean stayed, hung out for a while, and left around 11 p.m. I will say, because there's a lot of talk about times, and you're going to hear times from me. You already have. People are like, oh, well, this couldn't have happened because of this time, and then this exact moment, blah, blah, blah. All these are witness accounts. Witnesses never remember these things specifically. Also, it's 1918. Not everybody has a watch. Not everybody had a pocket watch. There were clocks and things, but not everybody had them everywhere. No one has an iPhone to check. So everybody just guesses when they say, oh, around 11, around 10:30, around 9:30. And that's just important to note when I try to deduce what is going on. So Dean heads home around 11. He speaks to his wife when he gets home. He eats some currant buns that he had bought in town, had a glass of milk. And then...
Sounds like me.
There you go. And then he wanted to go milk his cow. So he takes his lantern. He tells Mrs. Dean he's going up to the barn and milks his cow. Remember, he milks late
at midnight.
In the evening.
Milks at midnight.
And he goes off to milk the cow. Mrs. Dean waits for him. Apparently, she prepared some food for him. And she's waiting and waiting and waiting. Hours go by. He's not coming home. She starts to panic, but she doesn't want to go up to the barn herself. It is like, it's a bit of a hike up to the barn. I mean, it's not far away, but it's not like just out the door. It is.
And there are creatures. There are critters in New Hampshire. There's bears and stuff. So I understand.
Absolutely.
She could have been scared.
Yeah. So at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, a young man named Arthur Smith arrived at the Dean farm. He had been hired to mow hay for the Deans, and Mrs. Dean ran out to him in a panic, saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm sure Dr. Dean is dead and he's in the barn." I'm not sure why or what Arthur did next, but I do imagine he checked the barn, didn't find a dead body. Mrs. Dean had checked the barn herself at 5 a.m., and all she had found was the lantern and the oil had been burnt out, but she didn't find anything. Around 8 a.m., Mrs. Dean calls a neighbor, Martin Garfield, and she told Garfield she's searched, she can't find Dean, she's in a panic, she's in, really frantic. And Garfield contacted others for assistance, and by 10 a.m., William Coolidge and Peter Hogan, who were Jaffrey selectmen. I will also pause, I had to look this up. I'm not from New England. Selectmen are like town council. So it's the local authorities in town. Apparently it's a very New England thing, and I had never heard of it.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and then also Pearlie Enos, who was the acting chief of police. The three of them had arrived. They were all searching, trying to figure out what was going on. Garfield and his sons were also at the Dean property to help. And on the property, there is a cistern in the ground. I think it's like 100 feet, 200 feet away from the barn.
Oh.
It's very low in the ground, has a heavy sort of circular top to it. And at some point in time, they decided to search the cistern, and it took a lot of work. They had to get a pole and a hook and dig around in there. And at the bottom of about 6 feet of water, they found a body. So here is a quote from Mr. Garfield, as reported by Bert Ford, who is a journalist that compiled articles in the 1920s for a book on the case. So here's his quote. "We continued hunting around and went up to the barn again, and we happened to sit down on the barn steps, and the first thing my boy saw was a piece of Timothy hay covered in blood. We then noticed blood on the step and the doorknob. About this time, the selectmen, Hogan and Coolidge, and Pearly Enos. Then we started off to hunt again, and it was agreed to look in the cistern and wells. This was about noon. I went down by the wall and got a pole and went up and took the cover off the cistern, and I put the pole down in this and soon felt a bag with a stone in it. After discovering the object in the well to be a body, we bit it back and covered over the cistern, and the selectmen went for authorities." Woo, that was a longer quote than I realized. So they covered it up, which I don't know if that's smart or not. I mean, probably it's better to not disturb a body, but it's already in water and they don't know if it's Dean or not. Like, yeah, it's just interesting that they waited for the authorities to pull it up.
And they found a bag with a stone in it. So like maybe the murder weapon.
Yeah. Well, I'll explain that in just a second. So authorities arrived around 2, including Mr. Pickard, who is the county solicitor, and they were able to get the body out. It took like an hour and a half, and they found it covered in a horse blanket. The head was also additionally covered with a burlap bag. His hands were tied behind his back. His knees were tied. There was a rope found around his neck, and it was Dr. William Dean. They also discovered he had a massive head injury, like somebody hit him really hard with something heavy. And the horse blanket is thought to have been covered around him to actually stop blood from getting over absolutely everything. I should also mention there was a 27.5-pound rock in the burlap bag that helped weigh the body down in the water in the cistern. Woo! So, yeah.
It wasn't aliens.
It was not. I don't think aliens would use burlap.
Doesn't sound like a suicide situation.
No.
And also, depending on how big he was, like, could a single person carry him and like walk him to the cistern and dump him in there? You know what I mean? Or is that like a group situation?
You were thinking the right things. Yes, we will get into this probably more in part 2, but I think it had to be more than one person. I'll share more of my personal thoughts later. But yeah you had to have carried him. And they knew
he was going to be milking at midnight.
Yeah.
Yep. And it definitely seems like
they knew the property because it's like, we'll just put a big old rock in a burlap bag and sink him in the cistern.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You guys and I are on the same page.
Did I win?
You win.
Oh, good. Okay,
Episode over. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for being on. This has been a Study of Strange brought to you by Dunkin' Donuts. So here's what was also found at the scene. There was a hairpin found on the ground. You can't definitively connect it to the murder, though. There was blood on the entryway, the sort of steps into the barn. There's blood on the door handle to the barn. There's some blood, very little bit, sort of spattered in the grass and hay nearby. A cigarette case was found in the cistern. Now, there's a lot of hearsay about the case. There's a lot of articles. There's a lot of rumors. It's hard to differentiate what was actually found and what people in town just kind of talked about over the years. However, apparently it was not Dean's cigarette case, so it could have belonged to a murderer. It was also not the brand of cigarettes that Dr. Dean would smoke. He would roll his own cigarettes, and I guess in the cigarette case was a brand of cigarette. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Tara. Were you going to say something? Or were you just
what brand of cigarettes?
I was just going to say, my Luckies.
Yeah, exactly.
Those brands of cigarettes in 29.
Good question, Jordan, but I actually don't know, and I don't know if I ever read if they mention what brand of cigarette. That is a good question.
Yeah, I mean, small town, honestly, it's like, that's such a big clue.
The milk pail that Dean had carried out to milk his cows has never been found. So that's interesting. Also, no murder weapon has ever been found, or not murder weapon because he was actually strangled to death, but the thing that hit him on the head. Some people think they found it, but it's never been definitively proven or found.
And it wouldn't have been the rock?
No, apparently it's not the rock.
That was to weigh him down.
Yeah, apparently it's not the rock. I thought that too.
Okay.
Yeah. And maybe it was. I mean, look, it's been 100 years. Criminal investigation tools, science, all this has improved. That's one of the,
I mean, I guess
like
the
annoying
milk
things.
bucket. The milk bucket could have been the weapon, to be
Had to
honest.
be.
I mean, that's
Ooh.
those things are not light.
That is something I've
That's
thought
what
about, and that may lend some theories there to why they never found it and why whoever killed him took it.
Mhm.
Because if it's got evidence on it that it was used as a weapon, they may want
But
to
what,
take it away.
in 1918, what kind of evidence would that be? Like, they don't.
So
look
they
for
could do
fingerprints, do they?
fingerprints. They can, they can do
Oh,
fingerprints. It just wasn't as good as it is now. But yeah, they could search for fingerprints. You just can't do DNA.
Sure.
But they could do a lot of other things. Now, as far as we know, nothing was stolen from the barn. Nothing was stolen from the big house, which was empty. No one was renting it at the time. Motive is a question, and it's obviously important. And my theory and your guys' theory, the motive kind of ties into those, which is fun, which we'll get to later. It has been theorized that whoever did this knew that Dean would be milking his cows late at night, like Tara said, knew his habits. And also my point of the cistern, and I think, Tara, you said it too, to know the cistern is there, because that can't be easy to see at night.
Exactly.
And know how to open
So
it and use it.
Yeah. So the wound on his head, it hit his left temple region, and it left like a bit of like a triangle shape in his head. And the thought is that it did not kill him, because the rope found around his neck did strangle him, and they strangled him hard enough that it broke a vertebrae. So it was, yeah. Not fun, not pretty. An autopsy did take place, though later. It was not right away, and they did find the current buns and milk, and they estimated through the digestion pattern that he would have died between 11:15 and 11:30, somewhere in that range.
Whoa, that is closer than I thought they'd be able to tell.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know how exact they were back then.
Nope,
but
I'm taking your word for it.
There we go. That's what they said.
No, I mean,
So-
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that's
had to be
Yeah.
close to midnight. It's a little earlier than
Yeah.
midnight, in my opinion.
Mhm.
He went out
So
early.
some
that night.
days later, yeah, absolutely. So some days later, a man named Charles Bean searched the barn and found a kind of a weeder hand cultivator, is the way it's described. So something you hit in the ground and eventually plant things in. It was found under a stone wall. I cannot find out what stone wall he means when he says he found it there. He claims that it could have been the weapon, and he claims that blood and hair was on it, but the investigators kind of wrote it off. So I don't know if he was mistaken, and investigators kind of were like, no, that's thank you for finding this, but that's not it. It's 100 years, so I don't know enough about that to also definitively say, and we'll do a scene later about that. Now, theories, as you can imagine, started immediately, and we'll dig in more into those in part 2. Mrs. Dean, though, became a suspect right away. I don't judge people too harshly for thinking of that right away, because you do look at the
Sure.
spouse immediately after
Yeah.
a murder.
But she was not in her full capacity, correct?
She was not in her full capacity. I will actually share a story right now, because I was thinking about this when people, including myself, and we'll get more into this in part 2, about why she probably wasn't the killer. And a lot of that has to do with physicality and the amount of strength it would take. And she's late 60s when this happens. I had a neighbor growing up who suffered from dementia, and her relatives found that she had ripped all of the kitchen cabinets off the hinges. So I do think that there's a thing that can happen with like adrenaline
Yes.
that suddenly
That's
gives
what
you
I
a lot of
was
strength.
about
Yeah.
to actually say that, like, sometimes if you go visit someone at a home and that is their
Mhm.
ailment, they can say, like, be very careful because they're very strong.
Yes.
It was
But
actually
do you think a spouse would kill somebody that systematically, like tie their hands behind their back? And
I don't. That's why I
No.
write it off pretty easily. But yes, it's worth kind
'Cause-
of notating. Yeah.
I mean, I could see especially if you swung something and hit someone in the head, obviously they'd have to be right-handed if it's from on the left side, right? Typically, that you wouldn't be able to hang them because they'd be too heavy. But if you pulled a rope hard enough, like, you wouldn't have to be that big or strong to do that, right?
Yeah, that's a good question.
But they would need a second person, because she wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
She definitely wouldn't be able to hoist him up and throw them
Yeah.
into the cistern.
I mean, I was going to do this in part 2, but let's kind of dive into her. I think we have plenty of time to do this because it doesn't take a lot. But one of the things I was going to talk about in part 2 is the kind of the bricks that were around the cistern that held the lid on top were loose. And if someone dragged a body, it actually would have knocked them over. apparently. So someone had to lift up Dr. Dean to drop him into it. And so I do think no matter how strong someone is at that stage, I don't think that's plausible for her. Also, motive. I know she's suffering from a degenerative mental state, but they were a loving couple. People talked about how much they loved each other. There are rumors that Dr. Dean was seeing other ladies in town, but when you actually talk to people that were close to them, they're like, no, he was so devoted to his wife and her to him. Like it's not a thing at all. So I think
such a family man.
Yeah. I mean, he kind of was, and he took care of her. Like, she was suffering. I don't know when her dementia settled in, but he had been taking care of her for a long time, and he showed no signs of wanting to slow down or stop how they live their life. And I think it's his cousin or nephew or somebody talked about how much that he talked about her and would miss her when they weren't together and all this kind of loving stuff. So I just don't see a motive. Also, no money motive, which can happen between couples.
Yeah.
They did not have money at the time. He didn't have life inheritance, or life insurance or an inheritance that she would have gotten. And same with her. It's not like she was protecting herself from anything. So no, it's just, I do not think it's her. But yeah, I was going to talk about it in part 2, but I think it's so easy to write her off. And there's a lot of people have talked about how the county solicitor, Mr. Pickard, targeted her and wanted her to be the murderer. And when the grand jury inquest kind of targets her, that's not true. I read through the inquest. I don't think he did target her. And he even admitted in his own testimony in it that he's like, no, I don't think she could have done it. Yep. So I think it's like local rumors that go into these old newspaper articles that kind of roll into other things that he wanted to put it on her. And he was even like, no, after learning, investigating and looking at more of the evidence, I don't think she could have done it. As much as the theory, it did exist and does exist in some people's mind. Yeah, I don't think it's her. So one of the first people on the scene, I'm going to rephrase that. One of the people on the scene immediately assumed that German spies got to Dean. So this was such paranoia because of the lights, because of the war. People did immediately think they got him. He saw something.
I'm with this guy.
He heard something.
I'm with this person.
He got him. Mr. Rich, his friend whose house he had visited the night before, arrived at the scene that day too, fresh with his black eye. And what we'll find is that there are conflicting witness accounts with Dean's comings and goings from Mr. Rich's house the night before. Some people say Dr. Dean never went to Mr. Rich's house. Others say yes. But Dean and Rich's family are the only people to have seen Rich with his black eye before he showed up at the scene of the crime. And the only people that could corroborate, he did get kicked by a horse and that's how it happened. And Dr. Dean, being one of those witnesses, is now dead and cannot corroborate that he was kicked by a horse. The thought being that Rich got the black eye while in a fight with Dr. Dean during the murder.
But I thought his wife isn't a credible witness?
Yeah, but I think some people don't consider her credible because she's the wife and she wants to protect him. Yeah. But it is a rumor and people believed it wholeheartedly. And still to this day, there are some people that consider him the prime suspect. So Mr. Rich did become one of the prime suspects, as I just said, still is to this day. In fact, a grand jury inquest, which I have talked about already, was held in April of the following year. Notes were transcribed from that inquest by Margaret Bean, whose family is still very prominent in Jaffrey. In the 1970s, she actually found the court reporter's notes and spent years translating them into this document that we now have, that I have read all of, and it took a very long time, and which people can find online if they're interested. So in this grand jury inquest, I think it happened because the public wanted something to happen, and the investigation wasn't really getting anywhere. Yeah,
you want someone to be able to answer for it.
Yeah, so I think there was pressure to have this grand jury inquest, which was like, hey, here's some suspects, here's some things. Do you jury people think we have a case? And they eventually said no. Yeah, Jordan, go ahead.
How long had Dean and Rich been friends before this?
For many years. I don't know the exact date, but Dean had lived in town since the late 1880s, and I think Mr. Rich had been there his whole life, if I remember correctly. So they've known each other a very long time. So meanwhile, sorry, go ahead, Tara. Yeah, what were you
no,
going to say?
No, I'm just thinking about the guy who rented his house. I was just thinking.
Yeah,
of something.
Colfelt. Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, we're gonna get into that.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, we're gonna get
So-
back to him, so I won't ask now.
Yeah, the grand jury inquest was conducted by New Hampshire Attorney General Oscar L. Young and Cheshire County Solicitor Roy Pickard, who I've already mentioned he was there on the day the body was found. The findings were inconclusive, and at the end of the trial, they basically just determined, yeah, Dean was murdered by someone unknown. That was their finding. Yeah, I could have figured that out.
The guy.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm with y'all. The trust fund baby staying over the winter, which is so unnormal, not having a job, was definitely a spy.
Right? Like,
And-
yeah, because of course he is. Because listen, he's a rich boy
Why would you stay there?
who doesn't have to work, and he's bored because he doesn't have anything to do. So he's like, you know what's intriguing?
He's been in the cigar parlors of Boston. Someone comes in, recruits him. He's like, I want a life like this. This is adventurous.
Did
You
you
know,
say
I don't have
cigar
anything else
parlor?
going on. I did.
Okay, that's-
Cigar parlor, right next to the Boston Police Department.
Wait, so okay, I'm sorry. We're going to get to him in part 2.
Meanwhile, I'll go into this. The day Dr. Dean was found dead, Mrs. Morrison, who you guys did the scene with, was in Boston, and she did not know that Dr. Dean had been murdered. And she actually went into the Department of Justice, the local office. I believe it was actually the International Division of the Department of Justice. And she brought the message that Dean had left her, that someone should come up to investigate in Jaffrey, that something had happened, he had found something. The only thing was, they already had agents in the area. And not only that, Mrs. Morrison had helped some of them already, and they were familiar with not only people in Jaffrey, but the Dean property itself. Dun, dun, dun.
Because the guy renting his house was a spy.
We will
Absolutely, and they were
find
trying to figure it
out.
out.
So that is where we're going to end part 1, ladies
What?
and gentlemen.
This is so fun.
Yeah. Oh man, the DOJ
Nice job,
files.
Michael.
Oh, thank you. The FBI files. It was actually the Bureau of Investigation back then, I believe. It's actually confusing to find out who exactly was investigating because locals refer to it as the Department of Justice, which they're in charge of. But I do think it was specifically the Bureau of Investigation. If I'm wrong, if people know more specifically who was investigating, let me know. But the files from the investigations are part of the FBI files today because they didn't exist back then. And there are, oh man, it's so much fun to read them. And that's where my eyes went crossed researching because they're also not always in order. So you're reading stuff like out of order. It's really confusing, but it is fascinating. So next week, we're going to look into the prime suspects, the contradictions of witnesses, and we're also going to dive into the spy lights, the signal lights from the mountains of New Hampshire. And we're also going to throw in a goofy con man, psychological criminal, as he called himself, a very annoying witness that we're going to talk about as well, just for fun. So thank you both for being on, and we will continue this. Everybody tune in next week.
You love it.
So cool. No, I mean, like,
This is so fun.
because his house was on the hill, right? The big manor house was up on the hill. So that had a good vantage point. And of course, Dr. Dean found out and was like, dude, you can't be a spy and live in my house. Get out of here.
And if Mrs. Morrison, like, if they already knew that, like, that Dean property, like 100%, and it's got to be that guy. And like, I was like, if Rich hadn't been a friend for that long, I'm like, that guy maybe could have like been doing that on purpose and befriended him on purpose. But if they've been friends that long, it's got to be the guy in the house. No one stays over the winter in New England.
Well,
Who the
yeah,
hell would
was
do that?
he? And I know we're gonna ask about this next, but the next episode. But did he have a lot of friends in the area?
Oh, which one, Mr. Rich, Mr.
The
Dean,
guy who
or
was renting?
Colfelt?
Colfelt.
Not necessarily. Like he
So
did,
what
but he
was
wasn't.
he doing in the winter holiday?
We will find out after these messages, or, Where we left off in part 1, Dr. William Dean of Jaffrey, New Hampshire was murdered around 11:30 p.m. on the night of August 13th, 1918. He had returned home from running errands and visiting with his friends, Charles Rich's family, had a snack of currant buns and milk when he got home, and then he walked to his barn to milk his cow some 500 feet away near their big house on the property which he and his wife had previously been renting out. Dean was struck on the head upon entering the barn with something very heavy that left marks like a triangle in his head. He was then tied up, hands behind his back, knees tied together, covered in a horse blanket, then further covered up on his head with a burlap sack, in which was a 27.5-pound rock used to help weigh him down in a cistern on the property. He was discovered the next day. This is a study of strange.
What would leave a triangle shape?
I think getting hit with a milk jug, like on the corner. If you hit it real
Where, like,
hard,
the
wouldn't it
handle
like
hits, maybe?
wouldn't it like indent with a triangle?
there
we
are
are calling this the Midnight Milker, right?
Ooh, a midnight milker. I like it. That sounds good to me. No, you bring up a good point. The milk pail, you brought up in part one, and I had not considered that before, and because it wasn't there, so they may have taken it because it was covered in blood and thought their fingerprints were on it or something. The marks, there are photos. I have seen them. It's not a perfect triangle. So I honestly think it's just something heavy, and it could be a rock, it could be a pail. Yeah.
You should totally. Are you gonna put these like pictures up on like Instagram?
I don't know about Instagram because it is kind of
Patreon.
Maybe Patreon. I'll definitely have links in the show notes. So if anybody wants to see them, there are plenty of links that will be in the show notes for everybody to check out.
Maybe the murderer just wanted to steal a milk jug.
Milk jugs in 1918. It was wartime. People had.
They were supposed to turn all their metal in.
Yeah. Man, never. It's like wearing really nice Jordans on a basketball court. Don't do it because you might get robbed.
Where are you playing basketball, Mikey? You be careful.
Nowhere anymore, but I grew up doing it, and that was like one of the rules when I was like 14, 15 playing a lot of basketball, is people would like tell you, because I had Jordans, they're like, oh, don't wear those at that court. I'm like, don't know. You're just putting a target on your back.
It's like Hocus Pocus.
Oh yeah.
The guy stole his shoes. Anyway. New England. I'm in the Halloween New England mood.
I love it. Hocus Pocus 2 is coming out. Maybe you get sponsored by Disney. I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah, a study of strange brought to you by Hocus Pocus 2. Oh, that would be so amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
It's got a ring to it.
Yeah. All right. So a few suspects came into the target of the residence right away. We have talked about them in part one a little bit to introduce them. Dean's good friend, who Dean apparently visited the night of the murder, and who many witnesses saw with a pretty bad black eye after the murder, leading to the question, did he get into a kerfuffle with Dr. Dean? And that is Charles Rich. The other prominent suspect is Lawrence Kohlfeldt, the former renter of Dean's big house, who many suspect was a German sympathizer and may have been involved in the lights flashing on the mountains, lights the government was investigating during World War I. Jordan was giving a fist pump during Lawrence Kohlfeldt. I think
we're onto him.
He's really, yeah.
He's
my target's lined up.
Now, before we get into them, I do want to diverge into a little bit of details about what happened right after the murder. So locals did try their best to investigate, but it is a tiny rural town in 1918. There's not a lot you can do. If you don't catch somebody in the act back then, it's really, really hard to prove.
You could really get away with murder.
Yeah. Oh, God, it sounds, I hate saying yeah like that because it sounds like I'm like, yeah, good on them.
Yeah,
like,
you can.
I don't
go
mean
back in
that.
time and off some people.
It's not a positive thing. So a local man named Richard Hinchman came by and cleaned up the barn. I know, Hinchman. Yeah, that's his real name. That is his real name. He came by and cleaned up the house and the barn. This was approved, from what I can tell, by the authorities, but there are a lot of articles from back then that claim that Charles Rich sent him to clean up the crime scene. But from what I can read, it was like, no, like again, they don't know CSI. They haven't, there isn't some special agency they go to study how to investigate a crime scene back then. I think they were just like, oh, you should clean up. That'll be helpful.
Yeah.
But obviously it makes it harder to investigate. Various witnesses came forward, and if anybody wants to read more about this, see Bert Ford's book, which I will have a link to, that claim that they saw and heard a wagon followed by a car on the night of the murder head through town towards Dean's house around 10:30, 11 o'clock. One witness, or actually multiple witnesses, also saw a car coming through town going the opposite way around midnight. One witness, Charles Bean, who also found a tool we'll talk about, mentioned that he saw a wagon. Sorry, my notes. I can't decipher my own. I was going to say handwriting, but it's typed, but I can't decipher how I wrote this note.
What font did I use?
Oh, Charles Bean, excuse me, said that he saw the wagon he saw go through town was not Dean's wagon or Dean's horse, because he would recognize both of them. Other witnesses say the car that was seen in town was not a Ford. It's just important to note that. It had a heavier sounding engine. The car, if it was indeed the same car everybody was seeing, was leaving around midnight. So that would have been after the murder if he did indeed die at 11:30.
Get out of here.
Wait, so okay, I like the important note that it wasn't a Ford because it had a heavier motor. Were there imported cars like Volkswagen?
They were not Volkswagens. They weren't around yet, but you'll find out later. Colfelt, Jordan looks excited.
Colfelt, our number one witness.
He owned a Marmon, which was a very expensive car, which I will talk about a little bit later on.
That he got when he signed up to be a double agent.
Listen, I don't think you want Jordan and I on your jury, because we're just like, yep, it was him. Like immediately, we're like, it was him. It was him. There is no more mystery. It was him.
Well, I might change your mind later. Hang on.
Hang on.
I love this. Good. It's gonna get good.
Change it.
So no one recognized the car, and no one recognized the people in the car, except for one witness, a young man named Daniel LaRose, who I keep wanting to read out of the corner of my eyes, Daniel LaRusso. He was in town in Jaffrey around midnight. Apparently he was looking for like a lighter or matches, or he was just hanging out wanting to smoke. He saw the car and he thought Charles Rich was driving this car that came through town.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, putting some credence or validity to this car sighting, tire tracks were actually found on a quiet road that circled behind the Dean property, and a pathway seemed to be made from the car through, the land towards Dean's house to a rock wall, and it looked like rocks had been pushed over where people walked through the rock wall towards the barn and the big house of Dean's. Boom.
Which is where...
Because there are rock walls everywhere
up there.
And
there are at my family's house in Vermont too. Yeah.
Yep.
Is that the rock wall where they found the missing...
The tool? I don't know, because all I ever read is he found it under a rock wall. I don't know what rock wall.
See, if it's under a rock wall, wouldn't that be where it was pushed over?
Maybe.
Yeah,
I think we would know. I feel like that's such good detail that something would have come up with that, though. So a handful of days after the body was found, William Dean's brother, I think he was named Frederick. I didn't write his name down. I think it's Frederick Dean, came up from... I want to say New York. I didn't write that down either. I apologize for my terrible note taking. He came up to town because obviously his brother has been murdered. He wants to know what's going on. He brought with him a psychic detective, or a criminal psychologist, as he called himself, a man named Vint de Curler. I think he was Belgian, so I think it's Vint, not Wint de Curler. He was self-professed in all of his credentials, and I won't beat around the bush. This dude was a con man. He was a con man. And de Curler, he's a character, guys. He is such a character. Vint de Curler. He had a huge ego, and like all con man, he just lied continuously, especially if people were asking him questions about what he was doing. He would have to cover up his own lies, so he would lie even more. He claimed to have been hired by Dr. Dean's brother to investigate, but not for a fee, because he's a very good man. Just to cover his expenses. And the expenses, by the way, were very, very high. And after Dean's brother left town, in the days or weeks after the body was found, de Curler stayed on. And what I find really interesting is the town, they really wanted to solve this. They were so eager to solve it that they hired him to stay on to investigate. He didn't accept a fee, though, because he's a good guy. So just his expenses.
And he's writing his own receipts.
Right, exactly. So a few things that de Curler found or claimed to have found. And by the way, he actually did, I will give him a little bit of credit. He did seem to really want to solve this. Like legitimately, he wanted to be the man to solve the murder. So he talked to everybody. Investigators did not question, he went out and was questioning them and finding out information. Pinkerton detectives also work the case. I never came across anything they ever found, and I love when Pinkertons get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Odd.
So de Curler claimed that he found marks on the entryway to the barn and marks on a rock that was near the cistern that were the same shape of the marks on Dean's head. So he was thinking that whatever hit Dean also fell or hit the floor of the barn, and then this rock or drug across this rock on the way to the cistern. Keep that in mind because we're going to talk about that in a wee bit when we talk about Charles Rich as a suspect. De Curler also claimed that he was able to see faces in pictures of blood spatter.
Oh,
and
the
faces could be the killer, maybe. And the pictures were asked about at the grand jury inquest, and he claimed he didn't bring them because they serve no criminal justice purposes, because you can't prove that the murder is in the picture, but you can see it all. I'll let you all look at it whenever you want. But of course, no one ever saw those pictures. I've never seen the picture. I don't think anybody ever saw those pictures. Yes, so interesting stuff there. And on that note, we are going to do a scene of Vint de Curler, and on Dean 2 is what it's called. This is actually pulled from the grand jury inquest. This is his testimony. I have pieced it together from 3 different parts because he goes on for many pages. So I just kind of pulled 3 different parts and combined them into one. Tara, let's have you read Vint de Curler. And let me pull it up myself here.
What a last
Thank
name.
God.
How did you know that that's how you pronounced it?
It's not. I copied it from the transcript, so it just wasn't spelled fully. So that's why it's not spelled correctly in that scene. Apologies. Let me know when you guys are ready.
I'm ready.
Let's do it.
Are you, sweetheart, are you ready?
Yeah, so you're reading young Jordan.
Thank God. All right.
This is the courthouse in New Hampshire during the day. The jury is tired, yet hangs on to every word of the eccentric Vint de Curler as he's questioned by New Hampshire Attorney General Oscar Young.
Why were you going by a false name?
I am very well known, not only in New York, Washington, France, as well as England and Italy, but I am very well known all over the world through my capacity as a psychologist and various activities.
Now then, to get back, after you discovered those scratches on the barn and the scratches on the stone, you compared those 2 sets of marks, and your conclusion was that they were both made by the same instrument?
Yes.
Since you have seen this instrument that Mr. Bean has found, do you still think that it is the one that produced the injury on Mr. Dean's head?
She has some notes.
She has notes. Yeah.
I haven't seen the instrument, and I can't furnish an opinion.
You haven't got any opinion?
I merely base my deductions upon the facts.
I ask you if you have got an opinion that it was.
That it was what, sir?
Please settle down in the court. Thank you. If you made any statement that the instrument which Mr. Bean found caused the injury to Mr. Dean's head?
If the instrument...
I ask you if you have given it as your opinion that the instrument which was found by Mr. Bean was the one which inflicted the injury upon Mr. Dean's head.
Excuse me, sir.
Just answer by yes or no. You either have an opinion or you haven't. Which is it?
I don't think I can say that.
Yes, you can. Pardon me for demanding. I ask if you have voiced that opinion.
I may have voiced that opinion, yes.
Is that your opinion now, or have you changed your mind?
No, sir, I haven't changed my mind.
Was Mr. Frederick Dean present during your whole investigation?
No, sir. He had returned to New York on Tuesday.
When did you change your mind about going back with him?
I changed my mind on Tuesday morning, and he went back on the 2:50 train.
Did your employment with Mr. Dean cease at that time?
I never was in his employ. He only paid the train fare and other things.
That is, you were willing to help him, so he paid your expense?
Excuse me. It's cost me up to about $6,000 up to date.
Oh, What is the bulk of that expenditure for? It wasn't for board over at the East Jaffrey at lunch or at the lunch cart, was it? I boarded there, and I don't think it would near correspond with. I have nailed this. Hang on. Excuse me. Sorry, I was being bothered. What is the bulk of that expenditure for? It wasn't for your board over at East Jaffrey at the lunch cart, was it? I boarded there, and I don't think it would near correspond with $6,000.
No, but you see, I had to be back in New York in order to discuss a very important proposition. And then, of course, I didn't turn up. On Tuesday, just at that time when I was ready to take my leave from Mr. Dean, I handed Mr. Dean a book that he had loaned me. I asked that he would lend me the book for psychological experiments, for I am always making psychological experiments. Giving that book, I said across the counter, "Mr. Dean, we're going back. What is your theory about the murder? It is the most baffling case. I am a detective, and I have got to get information."
And there you have it.
Wait,
yes.
this is from the trial.
Yeah. I did make a few minor changes because I combined like 3 different sections of his testimony. So I just added like a couple of weird things, but it's 99%.
Crazy. Yeah. I love it. Like, why'd you use a fake name? And he's like, "I'm a very famous.
I'm so
person."
famous. I'm
Doesn't
famous.
that sound so
France,
much like a famous
Italy,
narcissist?
Scotland, Germany, Bangladesh. I'm famous. I'm so famous.
Also,
everywhere.
Italy as well.
Yeah, and which means when he showed up, it's so because nowadays when you read about it, everybody just knows who he is, so they just refer to him as that. But he must have shown up to town using a completely different name. For what reason? You can't imagine. Like, yeah.
Also, $6,000 in 1918. How much is that today? Have we done that?
I have not done that. I actually find out because I always make jokes when people ask this. I'm like $482,000, but it's actually probably like 20 grand. No, it's probably more than that.
Yeah,
it's a lot. Yeah, find out. Tara's looking it up. Everybody, we're gonna hold for Tara calculating.
It'd be equal to $122,103 in
Whoa.
2022.
That is so much more than I thought.
Jesus.
He's like, "Listen, I'm staying at East Jaffrey, and I'd be damned if my bill is $122,000 because."
Wow. Now, I didn't include every bit of interesting thing that he said because we would literally be here for weeks. Because it's a long testimony, but I did want to give just a hint because I think he's so interesting as to the way he talked about. Now, the lawyer, the Young, who was interviewing him, also Pickard, the county solicitor, did interview him some too, and DeCurler gets in just weird, like combative kind of things every now and then when it's like simple things. It's so interesting, and so I think it hurt the case. You know, when you have somebody like that involved, even if they really wanted to solve it and solve it legitimately, like you can't trust what they say. You can't trust what information they compile. So it's kind of sad that he was involved. Now, my favorite part about him is that the locals have already said hired him. I just find it so interesting that they brought him on.
Oh, bless.
Now, a couple of clarifications I want to make in case you read about this case, listeners out there, in case you're researching this on your own. A lot of claims say that Pickard wanted Mrs. Dean during the grand jury trial. He really wanted to pinpoint it on Mrs. Dean, or that he really wanted to pinpoint it on Rich or Colfelt. Like, people have their own opinions about the way Pickard was doing his investigation. But when you read the testimony, and you read the whole thing like I did, which took way too long, and you read Pickard's own testimony, he did not seem to have an opinion or want of one suspect over the other. He was very much just like, I don't know who did it. Here's the information. What can we decide? So he's not as opinionated as I think a lot of the local rumors and articles and things you come across read. We talked about Mrs. Dean a little bit in part 1. We don't think she could have done it. We won't need to go into that again. If anybody out there is listening and wants to review that, go into part 1. It's towards the end of that episode. The other quick little thing we can go into before we get into the main suspects is some people theorize that it could be hoodlums, like some kids or some young vagabonds were hanging out in the barn, and Dean came in to milk the cow, and they were panicked and were like, "Oh God, we've been found," and like hit them and tied them up and drug them.
Panic! Here's all this rope we have prepared.
Yeah,
no.
that's where it doesn't tie in with my mind. Jordan,
Dismissed.
you gonna say something?
I just turned my mic back on.
Oh, Tara, make sure he turns it off. Yeah. So, so anyway, that is one of the other theories, is that hoodlums could have done it. I don't agree with it for the main reason Jordan just said, or Tara just said. Which one of you said it? I'm already losing my mind about the ropes.
Me.
Who said that? Okay. Yeah, I think you panic if you hit somebody in panic and you kill them. I don't think you're tying them up by the knees and the arms and the head and
because also if he got hit but not killed, then he was tied up. Was he tortured or anything? Do we know that?
That's part of my theory. It's like, why? Yeah, spies.
Of course, he was. They had to pump him for information.
Yeah,
and then they offed him.
Your daughter fully agrees. My opinion. Yeah,
thank you.
She's like, I get you, Dad.
2 votes.
I back him up. If anyone disagrees with my reasoning to write off either Mrs. Dean or the hoodlums, please write me a study of strange at gmail.com. Now, all right, with that out of the way, we have the two main suspects, Colfelt, who was the lodger of the big house with his family, and Charles Rich, the friend. Who do you guys want to talk about first?
Let's talk about Rich first.
Okay.
So we can get that.
That means I have to scroll further down in my notes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right. A quick refresher. Charles Rich is the bank cashier. In some articles you read, they call him a banker. He's just the cashier, but a very important job. He also worked at the local courthouse. Again, not a judge. I talked about that in part 1. He's always referred to as judge. He's not a judge. These
crazy titles where it's like, yeah, we just call him that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just people hear he worked in the courthouse and they're like, oh, a judge. And it just, once one rumor happens or one mistake happens, people read it, pick up on it, and it turns into fact. So Dean visited Rich. They had known each other for years. They were friends. They would play billiards together sometimes. The families knew each other. And Dean visited supposedly Rich on the night of the murder when he drove Rich's sister-in-law, Georgiana Hodgkins, back home that night. Rich had a black eye because he said he got hit by the horse and it made his hand jerk up, hit his pipe, hit his basket, hit his eye. And he apparently got advice from Dean to put alcohol on it. And Dean apparently left Rich's house around 10:30 or in that range. So that's the kind of the story we talked about, the common story. Rich is weird. I'm gonna admit this before I say everything about him. There's some inconsistencies with him as a suspect. So even as I glance at my notes right now, I'm like, God, how am I even going to tell this? Because I've got to bounce around a little bit. But that's just what we're going to have to do.
Yeah. My God, this is so interesting. I want to go drive around Jaffrey when we're there to be like, oh.
I know. I really want to go
through Jaffrey. The town square
too.
is still, you know what I mean? Like the town square would still be
there.
It
can't be that different. Yeah. Yeah, just Rich is hard to pinpoint in my opinion. So when I go over some of the facts about him and details about why he's a suspect, I apologize if it seems like it's bouncing around, and that's my own fault of not being able to fully agree that he's a suspect. So all right, the morning after the murder, here's some things that may make Rich look like a suspect, like he could have done it.
Okay.
Not look like a suspect. He is a suspect, but it's not good for him. So after the murder, Rich apparently went to the undertaker. This is the morning that Dean was found, and asked if he was going up to the Dean property. And the undertaker was like, what, why? And Dean was like, oh, Mr. Dean's dead. And this is at 8 a.m. before they ever found his body. That's according to the undertaker. This is according to the undertaker. According to Mr. Rich, though, Rich actually says, no, it was 11 a.m. and I never said Dean's dead. I said he's missing and everybody's up there looking for him. Can you take me up in your car? He wanted a ride up to the Dean property.
Oh my God, why would you lie about that? To be like, yeah, no, I went to the undertaker and I said all of this other stuff.
Yeah, I don't. If Rich did it, he's not an idiot. I don't think he's going to go in and be like, oh, Dean's dead. Take me up there. It's like, what? No. So I think the undertaker is literally just mistaken. I don't think he's trying to get Rich to look guilty. I literally think just the undertaker is mistaken about the time of day it happened and what exactly happened. However, it's worth noting, that the undertaker claims this. Now, one of my questions, I'm going to pose this to you guys. Again, it's why I have a tough time with Rich. You got to have motivation. Motivation's a big factor in any murder. What kind of motivation would someone like Rich? He works in a bank. He's a friend with a guy. Hey, come on, if you guys are writing a script, like, why would someone like this want to kill Dr. Dean?
If he had any involvement with the German spies, like if he was also like a double agent, or
cool.
if he was like he helped the other guy kill him because he got rid of his, location for the lights.
That's the only thing I could think of. They flipped him. They flipped a prominent person in the community that they knew they could.
It's kind of the only motivation I can think of as well, because money wasn't a motivation. Like, he didn't, like, Dr. Dean didn't know money to the guy. Mm-hmm. Dr. Dean was overdrafted at the bank, but like by a few dollars, and apparently that would happen every so often.
Unless he, you said that there were rumors that he was kind of like philandering around town, and he brought his wife home. If he was like, why were you with my wife? And he was like, oh, she just asked for a ride. And it's like, after boinking her, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, so this is, just to clarify that, it was his sister-in-law that he brought home, not his wife. So Mrs. Dean was home. But that is also a good motivating factor, though, Tara, is like, was there some philandering going on? But Mrs. Rich, Mrs. Dean, like all these other people that are super intimate with these families basically shut that down. But that's
great.
It's kind of good. Like money, which I don't agree was a thing, because Dr. Dean didn't know money. Have any. Philandering, which everybody's like, no. And the potential of like in cahoots with some other people related to spies. And that's the only one that I think has any chance of being true if Mr. Rich was involved. Now, I mentioned the car seen by witnesses earlier, and that this guy or this young man saw Rich driving a car that had 2 other men in it that he could not identify. Witnesses also saw a carriage go towards Dean's house before the murder that was followed by a car. And one witness who slept on his porch because his wife had tuberculosis, although he still called it consumption. So I love his testimony when they say that. Apparently, porch sleeping was very common for people with tuberculosis and people that would move to that area of the country on purpose. So he slept on the porch and saw from Rich's house this carriage leave around 10:30, something like that, and claimed it was Rich. So why is he leaving the house? Why didn't he ever tell people he left the house? Because he said he was home all night. Someone saw him in a car. He also has a black eye. That's kind of also a big deal to some people. DeCurler, our good friend, psychic detective DeCurler,
oh my gosh,
kind of thought Rich did it. And he invited people, including Rich, up to the Dean property when DeCurler was investigating. And DeCurler had drawn the shape of the hit on Dean's head on a piece of paper. And he looked at Rich, and the story goes that he took the paper and slapped it on Rich's face by his eye where he still had some marks. And DeCurler claimed it's the same marks. So, like, therefore he did it, was kind of his suggestion. When this happened, Rich didn't defend himself. But as Rich says, he was just in shock. He was like, I was just baffled. I was just in shock of what happened. But so some people put some validity into this idea of like, oh, the marks on Dean's head match Rich's eye. I don't think that's actually true. I think DeCurler is just a nut. And like slapping a piece of paper on someone's face is it's so bizarre and weird.
If they did match. Yeah, interesting. Anyway,
yeah. Well, also, most people say he didn't have marks on his eye. Most people are like, he just had a black eye. He didn't have marks. So I really feel like DeCurler was just trying to invent something there. Rich actually filed a libel suit against newspapers after the murder in the years after it, because so many people claimed that he did it, that he was actually like, you're ruining my life. This is libelous. So he won the case. So he actually won this court case. Yeah. Now, there are questions about Dean going to Rich's house the night of the murder. Some people saw Dean leave town alone. Others saw him leave with Georgiana Hodgkins. So I think it's just a he said, she said, and I think witnesses are also not great. They're not great for evidence. They're great to hear, but they don't always see and remember things correctly. So I'm not sure what to believe in whether he went to Rich's house or not. And also I question, what does it even matter with the murder? Like, because if he went to Rich's house, do they get into a fight? But if he didn't go to Rich's house, why was Rich going over there later to kill him? Like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to fit to me. So I actually do think Dean went to the Rich's house. Also, Mrs. Dean, she said that Dr. Dean came home at 9:30, which means he would not have gone to Rich's house. But the people that say this don't take into account that she was suffering from dementia. And in other times that she was asked, she said 10:30. And in other times she was asked, she said he went to his friend Rich's house. So I think we cannot rely on her for information. And time. I don't think we can rely on anybody for time in these stories, especially her. So, question.
I feel like none of that matters because he was a known midnight milker. It was clear that people knew that and people premeditated that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so similar to, this is why I'm going to say why not Rich, and I've already kind of gone into that when I brought up stuff. Similar to Colfelt, his testimony, and I'm going to talk about Colfelt's testimony later too. Rich's testimony in the grand jury hearing just makes sense. And when I was working on my shows and I was researching stuff and just my own love of stories like this, the more bizarre a story is, the more it's likely that there's lies in it. Like things have to kind of line up when someone tells the truth. And everything Mr. Rich says in his testimony lines up to me. Like everything about his horse, the time, Dr. Dean coming over and hanging out on the porch, but like Mr. Rich didn't talk to him a lot because he was trying to treat his eye. Like everything he talks about seems very earnest, very authentic, very real. Obviously, I'm just reading it. I'm not hearing it. But still, it seems, and also it just all makes sense. There's no inconsistencies about what he says. And I think a lot of what he went through as a suspect and still goes through as a suspect is just local rumor. I think rumor spreads, it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows. And that's where it is. They were friends. These are guys that would hang out. They would talk a lot. Mrs. Dean and Mrs. Rich knew each other very well. Obviously, Dr. Dean went over to hang out that night. You know, like,
are there any descendants in this town that you're going to have to interview?
That is a good. I don't think the Riches are. There's a lot of descendants with the Bean family and other families. There's also some videos on YouTube that were done in like the early 90s that people shared with two gentlemen who were alive back then, and one of them even saw Rich with the black eye.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, but from my account of the videos I saw them in, it doesn't sound like they think Rich did it either. Yeah. So yeah, they were friends. They weren't enemies. The only way I think he would ever have been involved is if he was friends with somebody that was a spy, like one of these people.
But he'd have to be better friends with the spy than with him.
So. And also money. He would have had to be paid. Like
and you would be able to find that. That's not.
You'd be able to find it, and no one ever he didn't move into a bigger house. He didn't go on vacations to Tahiti. Like he stayed in town and did his job. So yeah. So I'm not a big Charles Rich proponent as a rightful suspect. I think you can write him off. Again, my opinion, but that's where I'm at.
I agree too.
So let's get to Jordan's buddy, Colfelt.
Yes.
Colfelt. Oh. So why is Colfelt a suspect? I'll do a little review. And no, actually, I'm going to... Oh, Tara's counting using her fingers. She has lots of reason to think. I'm actually going to talk about the signal lights to give some background to that, because that does tie in with Colfelt as a suspect. Around the time Lawrence Colfelt moved to New Hampshire was around the time that the lights actually started. Not exact, but it's around that time. As you've heard me say, there have been many reports about these strange lights coming from the top of Mount Monadnock and other Pack Monadnock and Temple Mountain and all the other mountains in the area. There's many reports of lights. And they generally start before the U.S. got involved in World War I, but they ramped up as soon as the U.S. did enter the war formally. And no one was ever caught doing this in the area of Jaffrey, I will specifically say. There's just rumors and sightings. People did try to investigate. The Department of Justice, the Bureau of Investigation, I think, they sent investigators out there to find out what was going on. And I do apologize. Ooh, I just hit my microphone. I do apologize because, again, if you heard me say this earlier or in part one, the FBI files are very confusing. So I just hope I do it justice, explaining, kind of summarizing different things that are in it, because there's just so much detail. But they investigated the shit out of these lights. They would camp out. They would find places to be. There were a few instances where they saw people that they thought could be going up the mountain, but then they would lose track of them. Like, there's a lot of different interesting things in these investigations. And there's a lot of it, like a lot of investigating. A lot of the pages you read are like, oh, we got breakfast and then we watched the mountain and then nothing happened. And like there's a lot of that too. The lights have been described.
Bill with his note taking.
Yeah. There have been a lot of descriptions about the lights because they're not consistent. They're flashes.
Talk to me. I want to hear it.
Yeah, they're flashes like Morse code. Some people have described them kind of like meteor showers, but on the mountain. However, to differentiate it and to validate being real lights is there were flares sometimes, like actual flares. There's lights would like be signal lights where they would shine really bright, then maybe move a little, then kind of move back, maybe move up and down, and they would disappear. Then there'd be lights on other mountains. So there were different lights, meaning that there could have been different codes. Different kinds of lights could mean different things.
Think about how fast they could send messages.
Yeah.
Like that
Like back then. That's nuts.
Because like
there's also
2 hours in a car on a horse and buggy would take what, 6, 8?
Yeah. A long time.
And they could just like all from Mount Monadnock. That is nuts.
And also text message.
It is, but it's unlike a text message. It's untraceable. Mm-hmm. You can't decode it unless you know what the code is. This is World War I, not World War II. So there was no what's the German code thing they had to break, the typewriter. It's always in movies and stuff. Yeah. But there's none of that. Like, you just have Morse code type of stuff. You also have the beginning of number stations, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, those weird radio signals that just count things. Mm-hmm. I think the earliest ones were during World War I. So it's like a form of like, we're just going to send a signal. Someone's got to know how to figure out what it says, but there's only probably one person who knows what it says. It's really interesting. It is so interesting.
Wild.
There's also, this is not in my notes, this is just from my reading. There was somebody that was actually captured, like a fisherman or somebody like that, by a German sub at this time off the coast of New England. And apparently the captain of the sub had been to like a Broadway show the night before. So they were able to get people on and off, seacraft back then without being seen. So it is fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah. So in order for these lights to work, though, you have to have people local that are either reading them, creating the code for them, putting them up.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to read this thing. This is from Bert Ford's book that I mentioned earlier. He's a journalist that compiled a lot of stories in the 1920s about this. It says, automobiles were seen in lonely sections of the mountains equipped with 2 rear lights as powerful as headlights. These lights were used as signals by covering them with colored discs of red, blue, and green. It is suspected, but has not been established by direct evidence, that dynamos and wireless apparatus were conveyed from point to point in automobiles. So that's just an example of like some of the things people had seen or thought about. Lights, they were usually seen on Friday nights between 10:45 and 11:20. Not always, but usually. So it seemed to be like a designated time. Mm-hmm. The signals in the vicinity of East Jaffrey and Dublin and Harrisville and everywhere we're talking about in New Hampshire, there were actually many persons of German blood or pro-German sympathies that lived in the area. And apparently, I cannot find corroborating evidence for this, but I read this somewhere. Apparently, this move to this area started because there was a composer named Edward MacDowell who was American but had studied and lived in Germany. Oh, do you guys know Edward MacDowell?
Well, that's the MacDowell colony.
Oh,
that's like the most prestigious artist residence.
It is the same. He bought the farm where it is to this day in like I think he died in 08. I think it was 1800s when he bought it. So apparently, because he had lived in Germany and France and stuff, but he was very famous over there. That's why a lot of German immigrants would be in the area. They would go to shows and like concerts and stuff. He passed away before this murder, I think 10 years before it. But that's one of the reasons why there might have been some influence for people of German ancestry to move to the area. That's really funny. I love that you guys are able to react to that. It's perfect. It's what I wanted to. So these signals also attracted international attention. Letters have been saved from France and the UK corresponding with authorities here in the US that the signals need to be investigated because of potential spy activity. a local gentleman named Frank Humiston of Jaffrey, who would serve in the war, has a story where he would see these dots and dashes and flares at night, and he tried to investigate himself. And he tells a story that one night, while he was trying to watch the mountainside, he had his horse with him. This car pulled up near him that didn't have its lights on, and people got out, and he heard something along the lines of, "Oh, this is the place." And then they saw his horse, and they kind of scattered. They get back in the car, and they drive away, and he kind of on his horse was near them, and they yell at him, and they're like, "What are you doing out here? State your business." And he was like, "Turn on your headlights, idiots," or whatever. And they kind of drive off. So that was, he suspects, could have been people trying to send signal lights. As an example of people that were actually arrested, because this did happen, just not around Jaffrey, a Dr. Rudolph Hutz, who was a Boston chemist, was arrested for espionage the same month Dean was murdered up in Pine Island in Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire.
Ooh.
And it was because he was placing signal lights in his windows of his summer home in New Hampshire.
Ballsy.
Wow.
Yeah. Also, a Count Johann Heinrich von Bernstorff, who was a German ambassador to the U.S. for a while. He was known to visit Dublin, New Hampshire, which I actually drove through when I was in town.
Yeah, we love Dublin.
Yeah. He went to Dublin to have a meeting with other Germans. And so he had some strange meetings. Apparently, he, depending on what you read, he either went multiple times to Dublin to have meetings or once. But why is the ambassador for Germany in a small town in New Hampshire?
Dublin, New Hampshire.
Because of Mount Monadnock.
That's what you would expect, yeah. So there's some specific excerpts from the from the FBI files, which I'll kind of mention because they're very interesting. There's it was reported by an agent named Norman Gifford that says Mr. R.C. Nash was sent to investigate. He was an attorney, but he had considerable experience in the woods, which is important in New Hampshire. And he worked with other agents and met with a Dr. Louis Bell, who was an expert on signal lights. And they determined that there is some likelihood that that signal lights were being experimented on in New Hampshire. There's a report from June 11th, 1918, which is pre-murder. And it says the country surrounding Mount Monadnock, and including Peterborough and Dublin, has every facility for pro-German operations. It would be very easy to establish a chain of signal points. There is much wild land, abandoned farms, and passable but disused roads, which could be utilized for secret communication. Lonely lakes from which hydro aeroplanes might operate are numerous. The farming population has not awakened to the dangerous possibilities.
Oh my God.
That is so cool.
Because
terrifying.
Harrisville has so many lakes around it that they named them ponds.
Yep.
So that so many people wouldn't want to come. I mean, there are so many lakes just the imagery, like every time we're up at Aldworth, like on the weekends, you'll see little Cessnas and stuff flying really low. And it just makes me
what a perfect
think about
spot.
that in a whole
Honestly, what
way.
a perfect spot for signal lights. Really.
And Lake Winnipesaukee, is like an hour and 35 minutes from Monadnock. But yeah, Peterborough, Jaffrey's on the other side of the mountain from Peterborough and Dublin. So they just had
the mountain circled
everywhere. Yeah.
So a report from June 5th of 1918 mentioned being taken to Dean's farm. And this is pre his murder, because agents believed it might be where a signal light came from on April 19th of 1918, as reported by witnesses and agents on the ground. Dean's farm had an excellent view of west to southeast. So Colfelt, our suspect, lived on Dean's property on April 19th when they suspected a signal light came from that area. The investigation also multiple times talks about Mrs. Morrison, who you guys did the wonderful scene with in part 1. Mrs. Morrison actually lived on a property that had good view of a lot of lights. She witnessed a lot of them, and agents would show up at her house and be like, can we come see? And so she would let them sit on her porch and watch the lights and things like that. So she's in a lot of reports, which is why I think she was in communication.
That's why he was looking
agents.
for the battery.
Yeah.
He caught that guy and kicks him out. And he's like, I need batteries to figure out how this thing works. He couldn't find batteries.
Possible. Now, I'm going to tie it in.
Tara, it all makes sense to me.
Just wait, because we are not done, though. I will tie it more to Colfelt, so you will like this. just a quick refresher, but if people want to hear more, tune in to part 1. Colfelt moved to New Hampshire in 1916 from, I think it was in Boston originally, but his family does live in New York, and he would eventually move back to New York. He didn't live at the Dean's property right away. They lived somewhere else, but close by. They allegedly moved to the area because their daughter, or his stepdaughter, was at college. She went to Radcliffe, which is in Boston. So it's hours away, but they're definitely closer in New Hampshire than where they were. No. New York. He's from New York. Sorry.
What? That's not that much closer.
They found a temporary place, and then they looked for the perfect place to rent that they could do the signals from.
Agreed.
So
keep going.
They moved up with 2 cars because remember, he was wealthy. His grandfather was wealthy, and he was basically a trust fund baby. He had 2 cars, but when he moved to town, he sold them and bought a Marmon. I don't know exactly what model of Marmon he had, but if you look at today's dollars with a Marmon back then, most of them were over $100,000 in today's money. So he would spend the equivalent back then.
So about what it would cost you for a good psychic.
Yeah,
yes,
damn near.
Exactly. A good psychic.
Mr. Drakor no War. What's his name?
DeCurler. I think is how you say it. So he was a wealthy dude. And he became friends with Charles Rich, and he also did become friends with Dean, and he would move into the Dean's big house in 1917. His rent was $40 a month. I just love looking at those numbers. I wish that was rent now.
What is that? Jordan, do the calculator. $40 then is how much now?
All right.
It's going to be a lot, right?
It is. I mean, it's a nice house.
It's going to be $784.
Yeah.
Wow.
For a very nice home, though. So,
yeah, very nice.
For a very large home.
Colfelt would play billiards with Mr. Rich and Dr. Dean from time to time, so they were very friendly. The Colfelts, though, were known around town as being very odd, mainly because of their wealth. I talked about this in part 1 a little bit. Colfelt did not work, which everybody thought was super weird. And the Colfelts stayed in town over the winter, which is also something you do not do if you are not local in New Hampshire. So the Colfelts also received mail at multiple different post offices. So they didn't get their mail at one post office. They would go to like 3 or 4 of them to get mail, which is also very odd. There is a local rumor that Colfelt would seem to really make sure people knew that he was American. Like, he would talk about it quite a lot. His ancestors were Irish, and he would make sure everybody knew. Now, again, that's a rumor, so I don't know how much of that is actually true. Because he's odd, and the war was going on, and there was a lot of paranoia about Germans, people thought he was German. In fact, an employee of his named Frank Romano told people that Colfelt was German. I don't know why Romano said it. I don't know why Romano knew it. I will make a short tease that Romano is actually a suspect in a lot of stories that you read about this. We do not have time, nor do I want to go into him. So it's one of those things, if I do a follow-up, I will talk about Romano. But some people think he may have done it. I don't. That's why it's my podcast, so I'm just not going to take the time to do it, but I will in a follow-up. As I've mentioned before, the Colfelts moved out of Dean's house in 1918 in June, and we don't know why Dean kicked him out. Dean said they couldn't stay there anymore. Rumors persist. It's because Dean found something out about Colfelt and wanted him out of the house. And that's why
he's
that's
a
why
German
he was
sympathizer.
Yeah. So the Colfelts' stepdaughter, who was in college, like I said, they found after the murder, when they were cleaning out things in the big house, the Colfelts had left a box. And in that box was a lot of pictures of teddy bears that their stepdaughter, or his stepdaughter, Mrs. Rich's daughter, would take. And people, because people are people, they just immediately went, oh, that's code. Those are all like spy messages. All the different pictures of the teddy bears mean different things. So it's spy activity. I don't know if I believe that, but I thought I'd still share because people do think that's a thing.
Was it the same teddy bear in each picture? Or was
I think it was.
Bear?
I think it's the same teddy bear. I think. Not 100% sure. I've not been able to find the pictures. Now, allegedly, and it depends on what report you read, the big house was found once the Colfelts moved out with some sort of chemical treatment on the windows. Like treatment that would like make, if it was raining, the water wouldn't stay on the window.
Okay.
So to make sure it's
because
like
you'd have to
clear,
be able to see. You'd have to be able to see the lights on a stormy night.
See the lights. Some reports also say, again, it depends on what reports you read, that either the screens in the windows or the windows themselves were discolored, like a hot light would shine through them and like burn or discolor the screen or the window. I will come back to that.
And then I bet you Dean's wife had been disclosed this information, and that's why she's like, he's dead. Because she knew that like they were getting into trouble and they kicked those people out and they must have come back to kill him.
Yeah.
Honey, I don't know why. They should just listen to you, sweetheart. You're right.
George just left the room. So, for various reasons, primarily though the paranoia of German spies and rumors that Kohlfeldt was German, he is the main suspect, he and Rich, but he is considered kind of the main one today. And don't forget that Dean told Mrs. Morrison that he had proof now. Like he needed federal investigators to come up because he finally had proof, and he had recently. Man,
he should have really told that lady.
Yeah,
what was going on?
Absolutely. So, any questions before I get into some more details about Kohlfeldt? Anything? Nope. You guys, you're ready. You're ready to say he did it. So I'm going to bring up now that Jordan left because he will not want to hear this. I'm going to talk about
He's
why.
Out. He's bringing my computer.
Jordan just stood up and left. Okay. He just ran. That's hilarious.
He looked like a Benny Hill sketch running in the background.
I'll wait for him because he'll want to hear this. All right.
Love it.
So now that Jordan is amped up to prove, or not to prove, but to get excited that Kohlfeldt did it, let's talk about why it's not Kohlfeldt.
He didn't. Okay.
Or why I don't think he did it. You can still think he did it. You're under no obligation to agree.
So you don't
with
think
me.
he did it?
I don't think he did it.
Do you think he's a spy?
No, I don't.
Okay,
I don't even think he's a spy. But you please disagree with me. Let me know. And all the listeners, disagree with me. Write in your opinions, please. astudyofstrange@gmail.com. So why not Kohlfeldt? His testimony during the grand jury hearing, like Rich's that I mentioned before, everything seemed to make perfect sense. He wasn't defensive. He didn't beat around the bush on things. Everything had a clear reason.
Mikey, because he knows how to do it. He's been trained.
By the German army.
Yeah. Hey, there you go.
We're just going to keep gaming up on you.
Valid.
Yeah,
valid.
No, absolutely. But also what you're saying actually is valid too. Like if he is very good, he knows how to handle himself. But my whole thing is, and I don't want to relate myself to Columbo because I am not a detective. I am not trained.
Please relate away.
But like Columbo, he would always figure out things because he would just find something that didn't fit. There was an inconsistency. It could be as simple as like a book being opened when all the other ones are closed, and it would eat at him until he was able to like piece everything together. There's no inconsistencies in Kohlfeldt's story that I can find. And by the way, I'm not talking to him. I'm just reading transcripts. So I could be wrong. So here's some other bits of information. He was in Portsmouth, New Hampshire when the murder happened. He was working for a shipbuilder because as he said in his testimony, it was wartime. He felt bad. He wasn't doing anything. He didn't need the money. So he signed up for work. I actually have a reason for why I think he went to work before Jordan says his thing. I don't think it's because he felt bad he wasn't working. He wanted to do something during wartime. I think he was afraid of being drafted. I think he wanted a job so he didn't have to go fight.
I think he knew he needed an alibi.
Boom. There you go. There's the other way to do it. Also, because he could still be involved, right? To disprove my own thing. He could be setting it up, sending other people to go do it. And he
could be sending a message to Monadnock and they'd have known right away.
Boom. So, but he was legitimately out of town when it happened. He did work for the thing. There's pay bills, there's receipts, there's witnesses. He was out of town.
Man, what a weird thing to quickly do that, though, to get like all those receipts and stuff. That seems...
Well, he just had them on him because he needed them. Also witnesses. There are like he works with people. It is a very specific, it was like a 7 to 5 p.m. job or whatever. There's people on the ground. Also, his car was in town. He drove his car there. His car was there at a garage.
I like the draft reason, though. He probably did that.
I think he got a job to get out of the draft. Yeah.
So his car, that fancy car, was not
car. It was not the one seen in town because it was in not Portsmouth, but like a little town next door to it.
Okay.
Now, as to why he was kicked out of Dean's house, Dean said to Mrs. Morrison, "A man like Kohlfeldt, young and strong, who will not do useful work at this time is not the man I want in my place. This by some has been taken that like Dean thought he was a spy. I think it means he wanted somebody to, because he had actually said this at other times, he wanted someone to actually use his land for agriculture. And Colfelt didn't, because Colfelt didn't want to do the work.
When did he kick him out? What time of the year?
So this is the other thing. It's often reported that he kicked him out and gave him 24 hours. Apparently, he actually told him to leave in May. He didn't move out until June.
Okay.
So it's not like he packed up overnight, which is, you read that a lot. So I think local rumor and what actually happened does blend, and people think he left right away. I think it took a month for him to move out. He also he didn't move far away. He didn't like run away from town. Even after the murder, they lived, I forget where because I didn't write it down, but it's still in the same area. It just wasn't in Jaffrey, but it was nearby.
He still needed to see the signals, so he couldn't.
Wait, he worked in Portsmouth, but lived nearby still?
Yeah, so he would, what he did is he started the job, he would go stay for the week in Portsmouth, come back on the weekend, because it's only like an hour and a half, 2-hour drive. So at the time, so he would go stay for the week, come back. And it was just during the course of the war. So he only worked there a few months, because I think the war was over a few months after the murder happened. So it wasn't like a job to do forever, which is also why I think he did it to not have to go fight, because the war ended and he stopped working.
Yeah.
So also when Dean says he wanted someone useful to work at the house, I think he wanted someone to work the land. I don't think he kicked him out because he was a spy. I think he kicked him out because it's like, look, I want a tenant that's going to work the land. There were also some other arguments they did have. They had apparently been fighting about chickens and some other stuff. Yeah, Jordan?
Well, I just feel that, like, if I were Dean and I knew this guy was a spy, let's just say, I'm not going to be like, hey, get out of my house, you're a spy. I'm going to be like, listen, man, honestly, I need somebody to work the land, and you're just not going to do that, so I need you to leave.
Good point.
Just a thought.
No, it's a good point.
Also, if he was a spy and they were also buddies, before he realized it was him, they probably chatted about like, hey man, there's like weird lights going on, and like I see some weird shit going on. And then obviously he's like, shit, he's on to me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can't disagree. I
could be throwing an innocent person
under the bus,
under the carriage wheel.
They're long dead, so you don't have to worry about sending in.
They could haunt me though up in New Hampshire.
It's true. So, I thought Jordan was going to say something. You were just pointing.
Oh, sorry, I need to shut up.
No, you don't. You're good.
Physically.
So they had also, they had been fighting about some chickens and some like other things around the barn. Apparently there was like Colfelt wanted to pay for hay, and Dean was like, hey, pay me for the hay. And Colfelt was like, yeah, I need a bill though. I need a receipt. And Dean wouldn't send him the bill, so Colfelt wouldn't pay for the hay. And it was this whole rigmarole. My point is, I think they were fighting and arguing, and Dean wanted them out because of very typical tenant landlord stuff. I don't think it sounds like he discovered Colfelt was a spy.
Well, then who did it, Mikey?
Oh, well, pressure's on. So we're not done with Colfelt yet. So apparently the screen and the lights and the chemical treatment and all these things about like windows in the big house having been affected by signal lights up to the mountain. I've never found any way to validate that. There's no pictures of that. There's also the like contradicting evidence of like, oh, it's chemical treatment. No, it's like the screens have been burnt. No, the windows were discolored. It all just seems like local stories that spread.
Is the house still there? Do you know?
No, that house is not still there. There's other houses from the story that are still there, but not the big house. But no, I've never been able to validate something happening to the windows. So I do think that's just rumor. Even in the grand jury testimony, if that was real, I feel like that would have been brought up. It never was.
Yeah, that would have been evidence that.
Yeah. Now, there's also another story about Colfelt. I forgot to mention that I will, because there's pros and cons to it of him being a suspect. But when he moved out, he had a big box and no one saw the inside of it. And he was really worried about it. When it was being moved, he wanted to make sure it was really well taken care of. He didn't want it bouncing around when it was being transported. And so a lot of people think that it was holding wireless communications. You had to be very careful because it was some sort of generator or communication device that he was using in spy activity. He said it was a Victrola, which is basically a record player. It's a stereo. Yep. So when I hear that, I'm like, well, yeah, of course he was trying to take care of his stereo. Like, that's what even today, TVs and stereos are like, when I move, those are the things I'm worried about. So
but if he's super rich, couldn't he just buy a new one?
I think people still worry about those things when they
still
buy new ones. Jordan's face when he said that. Yeah. So anyway, that's my reasoning for why he was worried about the box. I don't think it was a communication device. I think it was a Victrola and he wanted to take care of it. Now, as to him being German, his family was most definitely not German. He was from Pennsylvania. His family lineage goes back many generations on both sides. His grandfather was involved with business and politics in Pennsylvania. He has relatives that fought in the Civil War. He loves
being an American.
He loves being an American. He was also of Irish ancestry. Now, could he have been a German sympathizer? I don't know, but it definitely doesn't point to that. Federal investigators did investigate him, and they actually just found him to be very pure-blooded American. Like they found nothing in his activity or his family or anything he did to be connected with Germany in any way. So those are my reasons to sort of
exonerate.
Thank you for the good word. So my theory, I will share my theory. I'll dive into it because I actually think you guys will agree with me.
Please.
I think the killing was very brutal. It seems like something someone would have to do with multiple people. I think people were waiting for Dean or approached him at the barn, which means they knew his activity. They knew he milked his cows late at night. They knew the land. They knew the cistern. They knew how to get there. They did not take anything. Nothing was stolen. There's no sign that hoodlums were, drawing graffiti or having a campfire. Like, this looks like somebody was specifically there to attack Dean. Also, being tied up. I think that he was hit on the head to kind of like get him to, just the initial like sneak up and hit him.
Discombobulation.
Yep. Tie him up. And then potentially, what is not ask questions. What is the word? Interrogate. I think they tie him up to interrogate him, find out actually how much he really knows. And as he's talking, they're choking him if he's not saying what they want to hear and not saying what they want to know. And I think that's how he died. And then they, go ahead.
No, I feel the same way. Have you looked up how people were killed? Other like in that time frame from like spies or anything?
I have not, and that is something to look into. I did look up other like spy activity in the area, but mostly it had to do with lights and signals. There were no murders that we can find that was like, oh, this is an international conspiracy of someone doing that. So I think he's the only one. He's like the sole guy, like victim that we have to even look at. But just the nature of the murder makes me think it's not Charles Rich. I can't see a guy like that worked in the bank and helped at the court, and he did other like things around town to help things out and had these like that just does not seem like the kind of guy that would kill somebody in this manner. Also, hiding him in the cistern, whoever did it knew he'd eventually be found.
Yeah.
So that can be sent as a bit of a message to like, hey, don't, be quiet, and this could happen to you kind of thing. And I keep thinking, as I think about this, who would actually assassinate him? And I do think spies. Mm-hmm. This rural doctor that didn't become a doctor, that just kind of farmed his land and rented a house. If he had enemies, they're not going to kill him in this manner.
No.
This has to be spy activity. And as I was thinking this, as I'm learning this, researching, I keep thinking, nah, it's too Hollywood. It can't be that. It cannot be it. But the more I look into it, the more I'm like, no, this has to be, he came across something. He saw something from his house. Yeah.
I don't know that it's the guy in the big house.
Yeah.
But it has to be. I mean, it has to be spies.
Yeah, because he
Why
also
else would this guy?
He knew something was up with the lights. I mean, giving Mrs. Morrison the message, trying to get someone here, like, I really feel really bad. I wish someone, like, if there were already agents there, like, trying to figure it out, I wish someone would have gone to him and been like, we know, dude, just lay low.
Yeah.
But
if he would have just told Mrs. Morrison,
just tell Mrs. Morrison,
we would know exactly what he found out.
Like, I overheard Joe talk at the, general store the other day, and he's speaking German, and I've been seeing, like, I wish he had said something to Mrs. Morrison.
But
she was a woman.
But it could.
Women can't handle dangerous things.
That's true, but also she's alive, or she lived because of that, maybe. Because had she known more information, she might have been killed too.
Ooh.
But also, like, I mean, it could have been a ruse to be like, hey, I'm going to get out of town. I'll be here working. Y'all take care of him because he's figured it out, and you need to do it.
Yeah. And that really does protect his ass by being like, oh, I guess he did. He left and got a job. Like, he is more of a stand-up guy than we thought. Lies.
Yeah, I mean, look, as much as I kind of write off Kohlfeldt, I think it's a good point. He could have been a mastermind behind this. And even if he wasn't German, like I said, he could have had sympathies. He could have been paid off. He could have, someone could have come to him and been like,
and if you're looking for something to do.
Yeah.
It's like, what's he do all day?
Staying up late.
Idle hands make the devil's work.
That's right, honey. But also, why the fuck would you go up there and just hang out in the winter? Like,
yeah.
That's right. That's the biggest thing, man. We've been in the winter. Brutal.
It's brutal.
I mean, and we've got all the modern conveniences.
Yeah. Now, would you rather be out there?
That up for fun?
Yeah. Would you rather be out there in the winter or during mud season?
Oh, I thought you were about to say black fly because I was like,
or black fly.
Winter over black fly.
Yeah, me too.
Winter over black fly. Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't been up there for mud season.
Yeah, I haven't either. I've got to try it out. So it sounds like
heaving.
Yeah. Is there anything else you guys want to add to this? Any other theories that you brought up?
Man,
if I could just wrap this up in a tight bow real quick, I'd probably. I'm just kidding.
I
solved it.
I wish
Jordan
we could go
guys.
like with a metal detector around Jaffrey, and like in the next couple months, and I could find the milk bucket.
Ooh.
Listen, the next time we're filming up there, we must take a spotlight up there and do a test.
Oh my God, that'd be so fun.
Oh, that really would
so
be
much
cool.
fun.
Honestly, do we know what kind of lights they used? Was it like...
I think it was a variety. I think it was always a variety of things. I don't think it was always the same thing.
Like, how powerful of a light did you have to have back then to be able to do that?
Well, I mean, even if it wasn't like electrical, like the gas, the gas ones they'd use for mining just had like huge polished discs.
Sure.
And they like emitted,
like a lighthouse would have a giant light. So
yeah, and honestly, I don't think you got to think back then. I mean, it's still rural. There's still not a lot of light pollution, but back then, even much less light
you're
pollution.
Right.
So you actually don't need something super powerful. And if you're just sending a signal from the top of the mountain to the other mountain, to the Monadnock, it's always hard
Crotch
to say for
Mountain.
me. Oh, is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you're sending that, it's not. Yeah, I don't think you need something super powerful.
No, because even really when you're at Aldworth, if you're in the top floor of the manor, you can see people skiing at night. When they do the night skis, when they carry torches, you can see them coming down the mountain, and that's good. That's good direct information from the land there for the story. I love it. Yeah, man. Yeah, God. Yeah, I did.
And we haven't even talked about how there's more ley lines that cross over the Monadnock region than like anywhere in the world. That's what, when we're researching weird stuff up there, that always pops up.
Oh, I've got to look into that next. Yeah. No, I mean, look, when I started this, guys, when I started reading, at first I was like, it's not going to be enough here for a story because these lights, they're not going to be anything. And then I look into it, I'm like, oh, these lights are something. Yeah. And then I get more into the murder and I'm like, ooh, this is a good mystery. And then but I never expected at the end to actually come to the conclusion that I think he actually came across some spy activity. Yeah. And that's what got him killed. I literally never expected to have that conclusion. I was like, nah, it's someone in town jealous of him or whatever, like it normally is. And it's like, no, I actually came to the conclusion, I think it's spies.
Oh, man. Poor Dr. Dean. One of the goats at Aldworth was named Dean. Maybe we can channel his spirit through him.
There you go.
We'll ask. This has got to be where Tolkien got his idea for like the Lights of Gondor and like sending those messages, right? Like he was in the war. He was in
from mountaintop to mountaintop. Oh yeah, and that's the other thing too. Just if people do question the lights, a lot of people that had either investigated it or were talked to when people were investigating the lights is in Europe they were using similar type coding and signals. So it fits. It was the best way to send signals that you didn't want people to understand or translate.
Yeah. Especially knowing that they use different colored things. Like, I mean, gosh, all kinds of messages you could send.
Yeah.
And that guy on the horseback, like that's really scary.
Yeah.
Him being on horseback and those people pulling up out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. And especially like when you don't have like you were saying, light pollution, like when it's dark up there, it is dark.
It's dark.
Like on a moonlit night, you're like, wow, it's incredible. Because like otherwise it is dark. You see every star in the sky. Like it's really something else. So if you're out in the woods by yourself without your headlights on, on a horse, and then you see a car come up without headlights on, like, what were they doing? And wait, what they said was, this is it. This is the spot. That's what they said?
That's what he says that he heard.
Yeah,
so something like that. Who knows? They could have been picnicking. They could have been having, it
could have been like lovers lane thing. Yeah, exactly.
We don't know. But it is, it's the coincidence of the lights going on and him investigating the lights and seeing a car with no lights on, hiding from people. Yeah, It definitely seems.
Yeah, there could have been.
And the battery.
Yeah, what was he needing
the battery thing
for her?
I actually do think he legitimately wanted a flashlight to see home, because there actually is talk that the rich family gave him a lantern on his way home the night that he died. So I do think he just was like, it's dark outside, it's hard to see the roads. I think he just wanted that.
Yeah.
But I have the same question. I'm not saying that it's 100%. I think he may have wanted his flashlight to work to try to respond back to a light and see if he could get some sort of provoke
That's
something.
What I think.
Yeah. Play with it back. Yeah.
Yeah. See what happens.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Being found, they knew it would be found, and it is a bit of a message, because say the people in the car that were like, this is it. Maybe they thought hey, those lights in the mountains, and they went to go try to find out what it was too. And then someone in the town dying, if it was rumored that it could have been involvement with spies and stuff, that would shut everyone up real quick.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. You both. This is better. I said, because you guys are from Arkansas, so I always go to thank y'all.
Well, Arwen was here giving her opinions as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing it with a wee babe at home.
Yeah.
So fun, man.
Thanks for having us. This is gonna really bug me not knowing this answer.
Yeah, hey, me too. But I do think we've been able to come to a conclusion that actually helps, because I don't think everybody thinks about the spies. And I've gone through the only thing left to do is talk to more people locally. That's it. But I'm so leaning and it's spy. I know. I've got, and on that note,
you gotta bring,
Yeah, on that note, listeners, please, if you enjoyed this story, you want to hear more, message me at a studyofstrange@gmail.com. Let me know, because I will do a follow-up if there's enough of an eagerness out there, and see if I can interview people in Jaffrey that are part of the Historical Society that have compiled all of this amazing research. I cannot thank them enough. They don't even know I did this. And yet, if you are listening, thank you so much for your research into this. I've spent countless hours reading so much, but it's been really fun. And but I'd love to interview you if there's enough interest. So please message me, and then let's tell everybody too to watch Squirrel and Ghost of the Ozarks, to see work from Tara and Jordan and myself too. I'm involved in those things too.
Hell yeah!
And
but
see
Ghost of the Ozarks
woods.
Is out for rent everywhere. Yeah, in the Haunted Woods, and on Squirrel you will see landscape from this area. So if you watch Squirrel, just know it was all filmed right around where this story happened.
You'll see a gorgeous shot
for free. Yeah,
a gorgeous shot of
Michael.
Mount Monadnock.
Yes, you will. Oh, God, I forgot that's the mountain in it. Oh, it's so amazing to think about that. Well, yes, thank you all again.
Love it.
Thanks, Michael. We loved it.
Yeah, so fun.
And that concludes the bizarre murder of Dr. William Dean. It seems like most of my first episodes have involved people named William, from William Herbert Wallace, William Mumler, and now William Dean. That's an interesting coincidence. Anyway, please hit that subscribe button, or as my son would say, smash that button, leave a review, and tune in for more A Study of Strange. Show notes and more information for our Patreon, which has a very special giveaway going on right now, can be found at www.astudyofstrange.com. And stay up to date with releases by following us on Instagram. And also, lastly, you heard me say it in the show, I am very serious that if there's enough interest in this particular topic of Dr. William Dean, send me an email, astudyofstrange@gmail.com. Yeah, if there's enough interest, I'm definitely going to be reaching out to people in Jaffrey and seeing if I can get an interview or something like that to do a follow-up. So let me know. Otherwise, thank you and good night.